Hello and welcome to this special awards season edition of Diminishing returns. This episode will be a real treat for those of you who are real cinephiles, as myself and Alan take you, and Calvin in most cases, through all 9 Best Picture nominees at this year's Oscars. We also take the time to discuss the ceremonies throughout the years, to discuss some of the other films nominated in different categories this year. I think James Bond and Frasier probably pop up at some point. And as always, we don't pitch the sequel this time round. This time we are pitching our own attempt at Oscar bait. This episode contains spoilers for Arrival, Fences, Hacksaw Ridge, Hell or High Water, Hidden Figures, La La Land, Lion, Manchester by the Sea, Moonlight, Ed Wood, An American in Paris, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and Blackadder Goes Forth. Enjoy. Hello! It's the Oscars this week, a week from now, more or less. So we are having a look at the awards in general, the films that are nominated, and yeah, I mean, there's a lot of topics for discussion, aren't there? So I'm Sol, and with me today, as always, are Calvin.
Hello!
And everyone's favourite grumpy uncle, it's Alan.
Bah humbug.
And I think we're going to see a lot of that drunkenness today. But we'll get to that.
I'm fully revved up.
So it's award season in the film industry at the moment. We've just had the BAFTAs. At the time of recording, they've not happened yet, so we won't be able to comment on that in much detail. But the Oscars are upon us, and we've been watching the films and taking it all in and trying to get into the spirit of things. Yeah, the Oscars in general, do you have any broad opinions?
I mean, I think when we were at film school, the three of us were all at film school together for the people who might be listening to this for the first time, and obviously when you're a film student, you sort of, arty films, like awardy films, that are often much of the focus. So at university, I remember getting really into it. I think all the three of us, we would stay up really late and watch the Oscars. We'd have to scramble around, find a stream of it. We'd have to really, and we all got so into it. But then
the 2009 Oscars, I think,
yes,
which were for the films of 2008, that was the first time I watched every single Best Picture nominee ahead of the ceremony.
Yes,
which I think I did again the following year whilst at uni. And then didn't do again until this year for this podcast.
Yeah, after university, I kind of fell out of favour with it, and I think I fell out of favour with it just because, when you do watch all of the nominees for each year, and, we'll probably be talking about this today, how many of those films actually penetrate sort of the wider public consciousness and are actually memorable?
I just want to pick you up on something there. You said that we were all involved in this Oscar hype. I wasn't involved in that.
No.
I'd already given up on that by that point. But
yeah, I remember you swatting us down for being excited, though. I remember you being involved in the discussion.
Now that sounds more believable. I lost faith in the Oscars and in awards in general quite a long time ago. There's something that I want to quote, but unfortunately I don't know who said it or where I heard it. But basically, so I can't credit it. But basically, it was someone who said the Oscars aren't a good barometer for what are the best films, but they are a good measure of what the Academy of how the Academy is trying to represent itself. But that's what I find really interesting about it, which means I like looking at Oscars from decades ago. And I like to look at the general overall trends and that sort of thing. And not just the Oscars, all awards, really, to some extent or another. The Oscars are a particularly egregious example.
I used to take it as just a fun celebration of cinema and a good sort of, hey, have you considered watching all of these films this year? These might be worth your attention. I don't know quite how much I think that's still the case. But, I mean, I was reading something recently, actually, that was suggesting that really to be effective, the Oscars should have a 5-year cooling off period so that everyone can kind of... Because it is odd, you find that culture and pop culture and Hollywood and everyone will get really excited about certain films, and then 2 or 3 years on, they're really uncool. No one likes them anymore, or they're just it's that sort of, and no one will admit to having liked them in the first place. And I think the most blatant example that springs to mind in terms of the Oscars is when Shakespeare in Love won in 1999 for Best Picture, and I think a whole slew of other awards. And Shakespeare in Love, like what the hell's that? I think if you ask the average person on the street, they might remember it as, oh yeah, wasn't that film that won all the Oscars, but I barely remember. And that was up against Life is Beautiful, Saving Private Ryan. It was 1999, so I mean there were a lot of good films that probably weren't even nominated that year. 'Cause that I remember that being quite a good year for film in general. Yeah, it's that whole thing of, obviously Pulp Fiction didn't win in 1994 or 1995, whenever that was, and there's loads of films like that are now looked back on as absolute classics of cinema and important milestones of cinema that don't tend to win Best Picture. And Best Picture is usually some little competently made drama, but something that just won't stand the test of time in quite the same way.
Can we just do a quick experiment, right? Look up the Best Picture nominees for 1987.
1987.
I'm just picking that year at random. Okay. I don't know. I can't even remember what won that year, so I'm not trying to bias this, but let's just see if we've heard of any of these films.
Okay, well, Platoon won, and I've seen that.
Oh, I've not seen Platoon. I've heard of it.
Oh, see, now Platoon, now that is a good example. So these are films from 1986, right? Because Platoon's a good example of a film I definitely have seen. Can't really remember, it was so long ago, so it's one of those that's kind of on my rewatch list.
Yeah, the other films nominated that year for Best Picture are Children of a Lesser God,
never heard of it,
Hannah and Her Sisters,
oh yes,
The Mission, and A Room with a View.
Okay, yeah, I've seen them. Yeah,
I've heard of 2 of those. I've heard of Children of a Lesser God because there's a Simpsons episode called Children of a Lesser Plod.
Of course.
So I'm familiar with that title. And I'm familiar with A Room with a View, the name as well.
Yeah, Helena Bonham Carter.
Yeah.
What about Hannah and Her Sisters? Come on, Woody Allen.
I've never heard of that.
Oh,
Woody Allen
what?
film, Michael Caine's in it.
Michael Caine.
Oh, 1987 is the year that Sigourney Weaver was nominated for Aliens, which was a very unusual nomination, that one.
But isn't it nice when the Oscars do sort of, because I was looking at the Best Picture winners list just now, and like 2000 and 2003 or 4, I can't remember which one it was, Return of the King won Lord of the Rings, which whether or not that deserved it is another matter, but it is kind of nice when they do
when genre cinema is... Yeah, it's very rare. The Omen being, I think it won for Best Score. That's another one that really sticks out because horror films at the Oscars, like, that never, ever happens.
Yeah.
But The Omen deserved that award because its score is wonderful and iconic. And it's nice when they do actually acknowledge that. There's usually one little film that'll sneak in Best Adapted Screenplay.
Yeah.
There's usually one supporting actor or actress that'll sneak in somewhere. And now, ever since they upped the nominations for Best Picture from 5 to 10 to then however many they feel like doing, there's usually one in Best Picture as well. And I think last year that was Mad Max Fury Road.
Yes.
Years before that, it was usually something by Pixar. This year, everyone was expecting it to be Deadpool, but that didn't happen.
No way!
Did you not see
really?
that? There was a real there was a real campaign to get Deadpool a bit of Oscar love.
What?
And it actually was getting a lot of traction. I think it won something, or was certainly nominated at like the Producers Guild Awards. You know, all these awards that take place leading up to the Oscars that are usually a good indicator of what's going to be nominated. Deadpool was actually getting in there, and it was looking like, okay, they're going to throw it a bone as a sort of bit of light fun. And you know, I personally wouldn't give a Best Picture nomination to Deadpool. I wouldn't even say it's the best superhero film from the last year, but
no, not the best comedy.
Yeah, like it was fine. Don't get me wrong, but like whatever. But you know, it's stuff like Melissa McCarthy in Bridesmaids. That's another one that springs to mind. Johnny Depp in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yep.
Robert Downey Jr. for Tropic Thunder.
Oh, yes.
Yes. But yeah, it's interesting because most, like, the Best Picture nominations, they do tend to be, like, hard-hitting emotional dramas. And this year particularly, and kind of low-budget things as well, which I guess is kind of, the big-budget ones are your explosions and stunts and all that. I've watched all the Best Picture nominated films this year, and I'd seen a few of them previously, but then I had to sort of catch up quickly and to do this podcast. So I watched 5 of them yesterday.
Wow.
And
that
they're all like
a grueling experience.
They're all like 2 hours long and about death. And it was pretty tough going, to be honest.
At the end of 2016, there were a lot of people saying it was a really bad year for film. And I normally dismiss that sort of thing because I think, well, I've not seen all the Oscar films yet, and there's usually a few really good films that have passed me by hiding in there, so whatever. I've now seen them all, and yeah, I think 2016 was a really shit year for film, because the caliber of these Best Picture nominees is pathetic, frankly. I think they're the sorriest bunch of Oscar films It's shit, because I watched all the Best Picture nominees, as I said, in 2009 and again in 2010. And there were, there were a few weaker entries always sneaking in there. But, the general caliber was sort of like, well, that was a good film. And honestly, there's maybe 3 or 4 out of the films this year that I would really stand behind as just being solid. And only one of them would get an 8 out of 10 from me.
Wow.
Or higher.
You're very strict with those 7s, aren't you?
Yeah. I just think it's a really shit year for films. I don't know why that is. I really feel let down because I was expecting to find some nice little dramas hiding away in here, and at best I've found a couple of very, very disposable, well, I could sit through it happily enough films. But a few of them, frankly, have been really shit. Really, really shit. But anyway, before we get into too much detail about this year's films, I have a sort of very rough quiz that I want to throw at you about the Oscars.
Ooh, yay!
That's sort of relevant to what we've just been discussing.
Okay.
And also, obviously, our show, our podcast, which is all about sequels and occasionally spin-offs, remakes, reboots, and all those other sorts of things, but mostly sequels.
Okay. Godfather Part 2.
He's got it. So obviously there have been 2 sequels in the history of the Oscars to win Best Picture, one of which was The Godfather Part 2, the other was
Lord of the Rings.
That you mentioned before, Calvin.
Yes,
yeah,
Return
Lord
of the King.
Return of the King. But in total, there have been 8 films nominated. So do you know what the other 6 are?
For Best Picture?
That are
For Best
sequels,
Picture.
specifically.
Yeah, sequels that have been nominated. You've got 2 of them so far.
Okay, Toy Story 3 is one of them.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, good.
I mentioned one of them earlier.
Aliens? No.
No. Come on, Alan. I thought you'd be alright with this.
Is there a Bing Crosby one from the 40s?
Quite possibly. There's one that I don't know what it is.
What is it, like The Bells of St. Mary's or something like that?
Yeah, The Bells of St. Mary's.
That's a sequel?
Yeah, well, it's the same principal character.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not sure if it's, a straight sequel or anything like that.
You think about which films won,
Okay.
and then what franchises they belong to.
What? That's not a clue. That's just the point of... That's just what we're trying to do.
The 2 sequels that won Best Picture.
Right.
Oh, Godfather Part 3?
Yes.
Toy Story 2?
Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers.
There you go, 2 towers. So that's 2 all. It's neck and neck.
What was the year of the other one? Oh, how many have we got to go?
You've got Godfather Part 2, you've got Lord of the Rings Return of the King, you've got The Bells of St. Mary's, you've got The Godfather Part 3, you've got Lord of the Rings The Two Towers, you've got Toy Story 3, so there's 1 left, sorry.
Ooh, what year?
It is 2015, so the last year's awards, and I've already mentioned it.
So bad with contemporary films.
Some would consider it more of a remake, a reboot rather than a sequel. I said before it was the genre pick that they sort of threw a bone to.
Oh,
Yeah,
God.
Even though it obviously wasn't going to win.
What you said.
Yeah, I don't pay attention to what you say.
People loved it, but I thought it was shit. It was just 2 hours of people driving.
Oh, Mad Max Fury Road!
Yes.
Yay! Oh,
Okay.
you hated that?
Yeah, I wasn't a fan.
Oh, no way. Oh, okay, then. Well, that's going to make for interesting discussion when we get to our Mad Max episode.
Yeah, well, I'll be honest, I hate the Mad Max films in general. I've watched most... It's one of those things where I watched the first one, then everyone was said, oh, well, you've got to watch the second one. The second one's the good one. So I watched the second one, and it was shit, and I thought, well, that's that done. And then the new one came out, and everyone was like, no, you've got to watch the new one, it's brilliant. And so I watched the new one, and I've never seen the third one. But anyway... We'll get into that at a later date.
Oh, the third one's great. It's got Tina Turner in it.
Should we dive into this year's Best Picture nominees?
I think we should, yes.
Yeah? Okay, so we are going to go through these in the order that I think they are most likely to... I'm going to rank them according to which one I think is most likely to win. And we'll start at the least likely.
Right.
And work our way
And this
forward.
is what you think is likely to win, not based on your personal preferences.
Oh, no, this is what I think is, judging from the Academies... Yeah, this is wildly different from my own personal preferences this year, so we'll...
And just to clarify, you two have seen all of the films nominated, yes?
Yes.
Okay, I've seen 3. So I will chip in when...
So you'll chip in when... You can throw questions at us, though, things you might...
Oh, I will, yes.
Because I reckon a lot of our listeners won't have seen all of these, so you can be their voice for
Very
the
good.
next few films. Yeah. Starting at the beginning, least likely to win, in my opinion, Hell or High Water.
Oh, that's one I've seen. Hooray.
Now...
Yeah, I saved this one to last because it was like 1 o'clock in the morning and I needed something relatively easy to watch.
Well, that's it. For me...
Yeah,
for me, this is one of the best films nominated this year. By quite a considerable amount, actually. I wouldn't say it's anything special. In fact, how I would describe it is if the Coen brothers made a kind of paint by numbers film set where they just kind of, go and shoot this scene, and handed it to another director, and then they went off and filled in the blanks according to their rules. That this is kind of what you'd end up with.
Yeah.
I was definitely thinking of No Control Men when I was watching it, and which, interestingly enough, I'm a massive Coen Brothers fan, and I think No Control Men is not one of their better films. So the fact that won so many awards was surprising. I wasn't that fussed about it. It was a good film, but by Coen Brothers standards, it didn't particularly blow me away. But yeah, Hell or High Water I watched, and it just sort of felt... It was an interesting, engaging story, but generally felt a bit unremarkable. And it was like...
Yeah.
Do you know what I thought it was? I thought they got so many like ethnic minority films in here this year, they thought, we need to have something white. We need the whitest film we could find, and they'll put that in it.
It's got Jeff Bridges in it, which I think... I don't think it would have been on their radar at all were it not for Jeff Bridges, genuinely. Because I was trying to figure out how it had been nominated, and it was the second he appeared on screen, I thought, oh, there we go. Because it's just it's a lot more entertaining than most of the Best Picture nominees this year, to be perfectly honest.
It was certainly one of the easiest to watch in terms of just, not too emotional.
It's a bit slow in the middle, but the last act is very, very good, really. I mean, it's certainly not an amazing film, but I enjoyed it. The acting's all solid, shot very nicely. Not a lot I'd say about it, really, other than it has struck me recently. I think this film really hit it home for me, but Chris Pine is a really underrated actor, because I always dismissed him. Yeah, I always dismissed him as a kind of bland...
He was my least favourite link in this story.
Really?
This film, yeah.
Really? I didn't particularly care about him in this, but it was just watching him in this reminded me that... Because he isn't just Captain Kirk in this. And I used to think, they've cast this guy in Star Trek who just embodies Captain Kirk all over again. And I watched this, and then I saw... Have you seen Into the Woods, Calvin?
No.
It's a pretty shit film, but Chris Pine is phenomenal in it. He plays this sort of arrogant idiot Prince Charming character.
Yeah.
And I think the way he described it is if William Shatner was captain of the Enterprise rather than Captain Kirk. The change you can see from those 3 films of him like dialing the performance up and down made me appreciate what he does in his other films a lot more. The fact in this that he is just playing it straight, and it is actually
it's
very
very
different.
underplayed. He keeps it subtle. It's nice.
And it wasn't anything special about this film. It just made me appreciate his performance in Star Trek a lot more, is kind of what I'm getting at.
Can't get past him in Hell or High Water because he is Chris Pine, and he has this very stereotypical, like, these pretty blue eyes, pretty faced jaw, and putting him in amongst all of these relatively ugly or unattractive character actors that fill the rest of the roles. Like Ben Foster, I think he's absolutely perfect in the film. And Jeff Bridges is great. Yes. But they've got a real sort of, salt of the earth quality to their faces. They just look like ordinary people. Whereas Chris Pine is movie star good looking. I mean,
the likes of Ben Foster and Jeff Bridges are both people that people will call out as great actors all the time. And it just struck me watching this that I think Chris Pine is actually a lot more talented than I had been giving him credit for. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's nothing particularly impressive about this film.
See, I think my point about this is that I think it's a shame that this film is actually Oscar nominated, because I think if I'd seen it without that level of expectation, I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more, because what I think it is, I think it's a very good thriller, a very competent thriller, but I feel like I'm doing it a disservice by saying there's nothing special about it, because I don't want to put it down, because I think it works very well. But to be honest, if I go into like a thriller, 100-minute thriller, this is kind of what I expect it to be. Like, I think it's interesting that we're praising it for just being competent in
what it
does. But that shouldn't be a disservice to the film, because I think it's very good.
Interesting phrase used there, because it is a lot of these films that I watched. It was like, this is the level of filmmaking I expect, and I expect to, if I'm going to watch a film, that was a good film. This is the level. To be
agree.
Kind of award worthy, you have to have that little extra bit where you're pushing over that, and didn't really see much of that.
So, out of interest, then, what would you guys give this one out of 10?
7.
Yeah, this would be a 7.
A very solid 7.
Oh yeah.
It's another 7 from me. Single 7 makes a return. So, but no, I agree. It's a very solid 7. Because I spoiler alert, I will be giving out a lot of 7s over the course of this episode, and some of them are weaker than this.
You started this podcast by saying that this is the weakest bunch of Oscar films you've ever seen, and you're going to give them all 7s.
I expect an 8 out of 10 is kind of the lowest level for an Oscar-nominated film. Really.
Fair enough.
And I expect there to be a few 9s, if not 10s, in there. You'll see as it develops. I think this is a really pathetic bunch of films. Hell or High Water is probably the third, if not the fourth, best film out of this batch of Best Picture nominees, in my opinion.
Okay.
And I've not exactly been singing its praises to the skies there, so...
Yeah.
So should we move on to the next one?
Yes.
Okay, so next one along, Arrival, which was very much the genre film that they threw a bone to this year. I would argue it's one of the very best out of this year's bunch of nominations. But so, have you seen this one, Calvin?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
This one came out quite a while ago, though, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, I didn't know this was going to be up for awards or anything. I went along and I enjoyed it. I suppose we should quickly cover for those listening who don't know. Arrival is about some alien spacecrafts landing, and we follow Amy Adams, who is a linguist, a professor of language, something like that, and she's drafted in by the US government to assist with trying to communicate with these aliens. And it basically is a film all about them trying to establish communication between the two species.
Well, ultimately, I found it like a great concept. It was really well made, well put together. The visuals were nice. Ultimately, I was really frustrated by it because it just didn't quite deliver on what I wanted. It didn't kind of follow through on what it could have done. And so I ended up coming away from it with a really bad taste in my mouth, and I didn't enjoy it, even though there were a lot of good elements about it. Just that full thrust of the actual story didn't pay off for me.
If you remember our Review of the Year episode, Arrival was actually number 10 on my 10 favourite films of the year list, which it isn't anymore because I've seen a lot of films that I hadn't seen at that point, such as 10 Cloverfield Lane and La La Land and Split. But
oh, wait, what? Sorry, La La Land's going to be on your top 10 list of 2016?
Yeah.
You like La La? Oh, okay. Oh, wow, I didn't think you like...
Prepare yourselves for a fun discussion in about 45 minutes.
Okay, no, carry on. Sorry.
But I liked Arrival. I know a lot of people found it very confusing. I don't really understand why. I thought it was pretty easy to understand, but
I mean, one of my main kind of problems with it was the way that they tried to communicate and the linguistics of it. Like, that is, I just can't believe that was how you would try and communicate with a being that has no sense of our grammar or language or anything. It's like
there were a couple of points where they did make a few pretty big leaps of, like, she points at herself and then at the other guy and says their names, and I was thinking, right, well, how are they going to realise that that's your name and not the name of your species or not?
Yeah.
Not to mention that pointing is a cultural concept as well. There are tribes deep in, rainforests and stuff, I believe, who don't necessarily have those sorts of concepts. Nothing
does except humans. Like, you point at something to a cat and it just looks at your finger. It doesn't look at where you're pointing to. It has no concept of what you're doing.
I'd like to correct you there, actually, Alan, because dogs actually understand pointing, but I believe they are the only non-human species that are believed to understand the concept, and even then I think you have to kind of train them to. Yeah,
it's because they think you've just thrown something and they're looking to see what you've thrown.
But yeah, but personally, I thought Arrival was a great, solid little sci-fi film. The fact that it's been nominated is pretty nice, I suppose.
I mean, what they could have done to make it better was not put Jeremy Renner in it.
Well, obviously.
I like Amy Adams. I think she's really good. But Jeremy Renner, what a fucking drain he is.
I made my peace with him being in the film pretty early on, but I do agree. I mean,
to be fair, they don't ask much of him, and the character doesn't do much, and it's kind of. But just put anybody in except Jeremy Renner.
I've seen a lot of people complaining that Amy Adams wasn't nominated for her acting in this film, and I don't really know why, because I like Amy Adams, but, well, firstly, if you're going to give her a nomination for a film this year, Nocturnal Animals, in which she did a bit more acting, but nothing about her performance in that film's particularly remarkable. She's fine. What would you give Arrival, Alan?
5
out of 10. Yeah, I'd give it another 7. So there we go. But that's another really strong 7. So yeah, moving on to the next one. At this point, I feel we need to acknowledge the sort of racial controversy of last year's Oscar ceremony.
Oscars so white, yes.
So obviously the Oscars tend to nominate more white people than racial minorities, and there was a big controversy last year because there was anyone nominated who wasn't white, or was it just a historically low number of people? What was it?
I think it was in terms of acting there wasn't any.
Will Smith was especially pissy about not getting nominated for something.
I don't know. It's a really difficult subject. I mean, I would say that, to be honest, it's probably more of a symptom of a wider problem in Hollywood and the film industry in general, rather than something to blame directly on the Oscars. And a lot of people were calling for, what would essentially amount to affirmative action, and I don't quite know. Because then if, a minority does win an award, you'll be worried that they're only there to tick a box rather than on merit, and it's a tricky area. Well, I completely see where people were coming from with it, but I think they responded to it pretty well, because I think they essentially just widened the net. They sort of changed the rules about who could be part of the Academy, which was previously made up almost entirely of old white men, to encompass a lot of younger people, of more minorities and what have you. Whatever they did does seem to have had a big impact on this year's Oscars, because there are 3 what you may call black issues movies this year. I mean, I don't want to be reductive by reducing the films to like black films, because obviously they're films as much as anything else, but it's the fact that it's strikingly apparent that something's happened when 3 out of 9 of the films have black protagonists, I suppose, is proof that there was something a bit weird to begin with.
Can I just make a quick point based on what you're saying about the makeup of the Academy? Back in the early days, the Academy was much wider, and sort of pretty much any actors were involved were part of the Academy and had a vote, and a lot of like contract players who were basically extras. And it's in the 30s. This guy called Walter Brennan won Best Supporting Actor 3 years in a row, maybe even, but 3 times.
Right. Wow.
And they changed the rules to stop. But basically, he was like a small bit extra contract player who kind of got to the top of the hill and started getting better roles. And so all the other extras voted for him because he was like one of them.
Right.
And so he won it. He just kept winning it. And so they had to change the rules to stop them voting.
Well, I think that's essentially what they've just done.
I think greater representation is a good thing.
Oh, absolutely.
I know that you can, make arguments against this point, but it does sort of. I find it curious that it is often about, black issues more than anything else, like, rather than, Indian, nationalities or Chinese or.
That was a big point of the controversy with the Oscars, was they kind of, they had Chris Rock hosting last year's ceremonies. They tried to kind of acknowledge the issue head on, and in the ceremony they had a sort of arguably racist sketch with a load of Japanese kids being really good at maths.
Oh wow!
They sort of acknowledged the black issues, but without acknowledging the lack of Asian people. And as you say, there's a whole load of minorities who barely get involved. But I suppose you've got to start somewhere.
Well, that's it. You're talking about black Americans. You're talking and it's you're not talking about black issues. They're not nominating African films or like anything like that. It's black American issues because the racial cultural divide in America is so great, and because the whole society is built on racism. So that black community is so separate and yet so involved. And so that's the biggest thing, basically. So, it's obviously that's what they're trying to represent, or that's what people feel needs to get more representation. Yeah. And it seems like they're doing that, And it's been a good mix this year because you've got the likes of Hidden Figures that are addressing the past and kind of, it's very kind of positive, look at these positive role model kind of things. And then something like Moonlight, which is much more contemporary. Yeah. And in fact, starts even dealing with different issues.
Well, yeah.
All steps in the right direction, or so, these things are never quick.
But yeah, that brings me on to our next film, which is Hidden Figures, which, again, for those who don't know, it's based on a true story, as many of these films are, about some of the people who worked at NASA back in the 60s who happened to be black women. So it's a double minority. Women as well.
Are women a minority?
No, they're a majority technically, aren't they?
But okay,
I think there's 51% of the population.
Two discriminations going on there.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah.
And again, it's something we'll see again in Moonlight. But it's like being black isn't enough anymore. It's like you've got to be something else as well. Yeah. But I found Hidden Figures. I was looking forward to Hidden Figures because I'm really one of my kind of other interest is the early space race, basically. Early space, especially manned space travel. I know a fair bit about, and I'm very interested in that. So it was an area I'm interested in, and it seemed like an interesting film that was going to look at the lives of these people. And to be honest, I enjoyed it. I don't think it did anything particularly mind-blowing as a film, but it was an interesting look at a piece of history that I didn't know anything about.
For the most part, I enjoyed it. Again, it's one of my favourites of the Best Picture films this year. I've put most of the films I liked the most are sort of the least likely to win, it would seem. But I mean, I thought the acting was pretty great. Certainly some of the best performances present in the Best Picture nominees this year. The one exception to that rule is Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory, who I can't remember if we cut this from previous episodes or if it made it in, but I do think he is one of the shittest actors working at a sort of notable level today. He is so atrociously shit. And he just about gets away with being in this film because they've cast him as Sheldon Cooper working at NASA. But but even then, it is proof that he is shockingly bad at acting because he is joke of a character. His character making fun of autistic people in The Big Bang Theory is just transplanted to NASA, and there's nothing different to his performance. But then he doesn't even sell his frustration or annoyance very well, because everything he does is so, I'm Sheldon. I'm not going to drink from the same coffee pot as a black woman. And it's just like, he does my head. He's so shit. And so he's in this film, and every time he comes on screen, it just ruins it. But everyone else was really great. Kevin Costner was great.
But Kevin Costner was great, but he was just it's pretty stock Kevin Costner.
Well, I want to call out my favourite performance, but I don't know how to pronounce her name. The lead, Taraji?
Yeah, I don't know. I've never heard it said out.
Taraji P. Henson, who plays the lead in the film, Catherine. She is wonderful. Octavia Spencer's in the film, and she is a wonderful, wonderful talent. I feel like she was somewhat wasted in this film.
Yeah,
she
didn't do
really
much
have
in
a
this
lot
one,
to
did
do.
she? Yeah.
And Janelle Monáe.
Well, I think it says a lot about what we're talking about in terms of, black actors and racial equality and all that. Two people in this film are also in Moonlight in major roles. So perhaps not that many opportunities.
Yeah.
There's a shallow pool they're working with there. But yeah, Janelle Monáe, who from what I can tell isn't an actor. This is like
she's a singer, I believe.
Yeah. These are basically
or a musician
two films
of some
she's
kind.
done, and they're both nominated for Oscars.
All round, I thought Hidden Figures was pretty good. Oh, the other thing I'd mention, and this is something that's going to come up again, it does fall into that trap of being based on a true story, which I don't like. I have a real issue with films based on a true story, because more often than not, 99% of the time, real life is not very well written. So you make a film based on real life, and you either have to massively diverge from what actually happened in order to allow the drama to work. And I'm all for that to an extent. Ed Wood is one of my favourite films, and in the third act they completely fabricate a meeting between him, the worst filmmaker of all time, and Orson Welles, his idol, the greatest filmmaker of all time, and it's perfect. But they never met, or certainly not under those circumstances. But it works for the sake of the film. And it comes down to that whole thing of, if you're given an option to choose to print the truth or the legend, print the legend. A lot of films will fall into the trap of thinking, oh, well, didn't the real life person get a divorce around this point? Oh, we'd better mention that. And then you just get this whole strand. So in Hidden Figures, there's this entire romantic subplot where the lead character meets this guy and then gets married to him, and it's irrelevant to anything. It doesn't add anything to the film other than a few scenes where she meets a guy. It doesn't. It wound me up. It just weakens the film. It didn't need to be there, but presumably they felt that they had to acknowledge, I don't know, her love life for some reason. So that really annoyed me.
I mean, I like that we saw that she had kids and all that, because
the kids,
she's a single mother and she has to deal with that as well as work.
Kids, absolutely, but I didn't need to see her meeting the guy, him proposing to her. And this film gets away with it for the most part. That's the only bit I'd really pull out as being a bit of messy writing that shouldn't have been in there. But like I say, it's because it's based on a true story. And the alternative is, when you start to change history too much, you get into pretty dodgy ethical territory, because then you get into territory like Titanic, for example. There's a guy on board the Titanic who in the film is portrayed as a sort of coward who tries to save himself, and he's not made out to be a very nice man, and he has the name of a real life person, and the real life person died drowning trying to save as many women and children as he could, and there's a statue of him in his hometown because he's a fucking hero. But Titanic has made it so that he's a dickhead, and that kind of begins to bleed into real life a lot of the
time.
Your script,
a lot of people just put in a fake name. It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
The people watching the story, it doesn't matter to that.
Exactly. But it does bleed over into real life, and a lot of people, I certainly will, subconsciously from now on, if I think back to NASA in the 60s, I'll think, oh, well, remember how it was in that film Hidden Figures? Well, they must have been like that. And it does form your view of reality. So I don't like films based on reality. I think you should just pick a real life story and then change all the names and just base it loosely on it and kind of do your own thing with it.
It's interesting what you said about Hidden Figures there, because one of the things I took from the film was, and I think it's important and interesting that we see these films from this time period. It's like, obviously we're much younger and also not American, but we forget, I think, just how bad it was back then. They've got like separate toilets for whites and colours and so. It's like, this is in living memory. This is like people's grandparents.
That really hit home for me, actually. I mean, obviously I knew they had all that, but that's it. It's the reminder that, like you say, it's living memory that happened. That
sort of segregation is so egregious, and especially like given the current political climate right now, in terms of trying to separate people into groups and segregate people. I think it was good to see that, because you do forget just how bad it was so recently.
Yeah.
But also, what struck me about Hidden Figures, it felt to me like a film that could have been made 20 years ago. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I just watched this,
I really agree.
It just didn't feel, and I know it's set in the period, but it didn't feel modern. I don't know why that is.
Tonally, it felt exactly like you say, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I think it's just tonally, it's quite a light-hearted film in spite of the issues it's tackling. It's very much one of those feel-good kind of Oscar films that tackles issues. It doesn't take them to particularly dark places. I think that other than people being a bit shitty towards the lead characters, and they rise above it and prove them wrong. And I don't know, I think that might be what it is. I think it might be the tone, because post 9/11, films all have to be gritty and dark, and you can't kind of have an unashamedly feel-good film like this, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree.
To someone who hasn't seen it like me, would you recommend it even outside of the Oscar buzz? Do you think it's worth revisiting, even when the hype's all died down?
Probably not, to be honest. It depends. Okay. If you're a fan of any of the cast, yes. If you have an interest in NASA or the space race, or the civil rights movement as well, if you have an interest in any of the topics, absolutely. But it's ultimately it's a very good drama, but I don't think it's one that's going to stand the test of time. It's exactly one that the sort of thing we were just talking about, really.
That was the other thing I noticed was, because obviously they're using a lot of maths in this. It's all about maths, it's about these people.
Yes.
The main character, she's like just a maths genius, and so she's working out all these numbers. And it's interesting how, because they have to present all this maths in a narrative format, but in a way that simplifies it. So there's a couple of areas that get very exposition heavy. But it kind
similar
of
to Arrival,
well.
Actually. Arrival had a lot of that with the language stuff, but
and it's handled quite well. But then there's bits of it where it's just like, okay, and then if we carry the one, then this will happen here, and it's like, and there's some really kind of dodgy numbers going on.
There was a bit that I didn't quite. There's a bit I didn't quite understand where she was proving that the maths were wrong for the calculations on a rocket ship, and she just sort of drew a projectile line on a graph and then another one to show out where the rocket would go, and it didn't really look like she was plotting it on that chart properly. It just kind of looked like she was drawing a rocket flying off. It did seem a bit like
well, that was it, exactly. They had to kind of express it in a way that looked good, because obviously in reality it's just a list of numbers that doesn't mean anything to most people.
Well, there's that scene where they really try their hardest to do that, where Sheldon Cooper's got like is it a toy rocket or something? Or a stapler. He's got something he's using in his hand, and he's sort of going, so this is spinning around the Earth, and it has to come in.
That's the really exposition-heavy scene,
and
it's handled quite well, because it all makes sense. You understand what's happening. But he's talking to the NASA group who deal with this. Like,
so what would you give it out of 10, Alan?
7.
Can you guess what I'm going to give it?
Yes, I can.
7.
Yay! But it's another very strong 7, that one. And so moving on to the next one, a little bit more likely to win, potentially not. Fences. Well, Denzel Washington directed it. This one.
I didn't know anything about it going into it, and sort of very immediately it comes across very theatrical. It's very stagey. It's pretty
That's what I thought. That was my first thought when I was watching it. Is this feels like a play, and it doesn't transcend that. I looked it up afterwards, and it is based on a play, and it feels to me like someone took a camcorder along to a performance of the play and filmed it from
That's
the audience.
exactly how. Well, it's a bit better than that, filmistically, but I know exactly what you mean. And it is indeed comes from a very well respected play, and Denzel Washington and Viola Davis were in the play. So, they obviously knew what they're doing. They just put a camera in front of them. I think that really sells it in terms of the acting and the performances and the story.
Oh, the acting was phenomenal. In terms of all the Best Picture nominees this year, I'd say this has the best sort of selection of performances across the board. The overall quality of the acting in this film is far, far superior to any other Best Picture nominee this year. The acting's the one thing I'll really sing the praises of, to be honest. There's not a lot else that I would particularly praise in this film. The story is essentially
Death of a Salesman?
Yeah, it's this guy played by Denzel Washington, and I don't know, he's just a bit of a dick, and he's worked hard to earn what he's got, dick, and he's never lets his family forget that, and falls out with his son, and it's just familial drama, really. It's quite a bit too long in terms of running time.
How long is it?
It
2 hours 20.
Yeah.
It's just talking all the time, very verbose, and
it's big, long conversations, and it doesn't feel like they've cut anything from the play.
And it does work, and obviously Denzel brings it to life when he's doing his bit, which he's the one who talks all the time.
I mean, like I say, the acting in this film, Viola Davis in particular, was the real standout for me. But obviously Denzel Washington's great. Yeah. Stephen Henderson was great. The guy who plays his son, who is called is it Hovan Adepo or Jovan Adepo? I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of his name, but he was great.
McKelty
the guy who played his brother, his sort of special needs brother.
McKelty Williamson.
So Fences, Alan, out of 10?
8.
Oh, really?
Oh. Well, that's it. Like I say, it's not very filmic, but that's sort of the least important thing to me. I like character, I like story.
Fair enough.
But you can't ignore that if you're going to make a film. Don't just film the stage play,
For me, it's yet another 7, but it's actually quite a low 7 this time.
Okay.
If I was doing halves, it'd be a 6.5, but I'm not. Yeah, we've nearly done all of my 7s, though. Nearly. Oh. It's going to start to get interesting soon. So the next film is going to be... Well, there's going to be some lively discussion, I think. Hacksaw Ridge.
Oh, really? Oh, I know nothing about this film.
Right.
What's it about?
Oh, okay. So it's about a pacifist bumpkin from the South.
Well, that's a pretty perfect description, to be honest.
What is he, like a Seventh-day Adventist?
Adventist, yeah.
Some sort of, yeah. Basically, he's a pacifist. He refuses to even hold a gun. Right. And he enlists in the army during World War II to be a medic because he still wants to go out and help and be involved in the, fighting the good fight against, well, it's the Japanese particularly in this film, but...
And so they all think he's a coward, and then he proves himself a hero by saving loads of lives.
Does he do it with guns, or
No, he just... I mean, we're getting towards the top in terms of what's going to win here. This is the first film on this list that I would say is a legitimate contender for the award. I mean, I don't think it's going to win. We all know what's going to win, but... In terms of, the other films were all very much like, oh yeah, we'll chuck it a nomination, but obviously it isn't going to win. It's the first one I'd say is like a real contender. I suppose we're into the top 5 now. This would have been nominated in the old days when we only had 5 Best Picture nominations. I mean, I'll lay my cards on the table, I suppose. I don't think it's a particularly bad film. In fact, I would say it's probably more on the side of good than bad, but my God, is it a fucking mess. Tonally and ethically. I mean, Mel Gibson directed it. I'll get into that later, but Mel Gibson directed it, and it feels like...
really?
Can I lay my cards on the table? And can I smash my cards in your face? Because I just want to say, this... And you know me well enough that I'm not saying this with any sense of exaggeration. This is one of the worst films I've ever seen. This is going straight into my top 10 worst films of all time, right next to Die Another Day.
Oh,
I can understand why, because I am baffled at the level of. Well, I'm not actually. I was going to say I was baffled at the level of positive response it's got. It's currently at 123 in IMDb's top 250 films, which is the first film on this list of nominations so far to be in there. Like I say, it's a fucking mess tonally. Mel Gibson, like, it feels like a very calculated move from him to make this film now. And quite a smart one, to be honest, because it embodies a lot of values that he's probably right to try and, associate himself with. And
if I'd watched this film and it was made in 1954, I would have watched it and I was watching it now, I would think, God, they made some shit films back then, didn't they? But I guess, it was straight after the war, it was very propaganda heavy, and you've got to have that shitty love story in because it's just what they did then.
It really does feel like an old school Western. But yeah, I mean, it starts, and it is Andrew Garfield, who is wasted.
Oh, whoa.
He's the lead.
Oh, I didn't realise. Oh, wow, okay.
And
he's terrible in it.
I was going to say, I love Andrew Garfield.
I haven't seen him in much, so I don't want to judge him too badly, but he's terrible in this.
I think Andrew Garfield's one of the best actors working today in that sort of age category. I think he's wonderful, but this is not a good performance for him. I've seen a lot of... Is he up for the acting award this year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he is. And if he wins, I'm not going to be responsible for my actions.
I mean, he won't do, but it's... that is such a clear case of, we've got to give the lead from that film that we're nominating everything in this year. Do you know what I mean? His performance is nothing special, and one thing I've just got to point out is every single time he says the word medic, he does it in a British accent. There's something about that word that he can't keep his accent going. But like I say, I love Andrew Garfield. This is probably the worst performance of his that I've seen. So yeah, the start is Andrew Garfield being his little country bumpkin. He's kind of doing a Forrest Gump impression, not to be too reductive, but that's essentially Forrest Gump. You're there. His dad is Hugo Weaving.
Oh.
Now, here's the thing. Hugo Weaving, great performance. It feels so out of place in this film because he's kind of surrounded by shit. And it just feels really awkward and it's embarrassing to watch because he's just, like, you can see what he's doing and how much he's putting out there, and it just sort of falls so flat because of the rest of the film.
I found him really out of place, but I don't know if that's just because I don't think I've ever seen Hugo Weaving in a drama before that isn't filled with robots and elves and... Anyway, he plays Andrew Garfield's grizzled dad who, lived through the Great War and fought in the Great War. And the first 20 minutes, half an hour of the film are kind of just those two back and forth thing. Andrew Garfield being like, "Oh, I've got to sign up. I've got to fight the good fight. I've got to fight. I can't. Guys are dying out there, but I'm a pacifist. I can't give up on my values. So what I've got to do is kind of loophole through, let other people fight on my behalf and just support them."
Yes. But the print, like, so his dad's fought in the First World War and it's obviously traumatized him, and so he's like to his sons, like, don't go to the war. I went to war. All my friends died. I saw horrific things, and now I'm an alcoholic and I hate myself. Don't go. And they're like, I think we'll go. But then he refuses to fight, like, or he won't kill people and he won't take hold of a gun. And so that's the whole problem. And it's this big it becomes a legal thing where he's constitutionally is allowed to serve and he wants to be a medic.
Well, this is it. He goes to boot camp for, the second act of the film. We're introduced to Milo Gibson, who I assume is one of Mel Gibson's children.
He is, yes.
Yeah. It turns out that... someone didn't do the paperwork properly or whatever because they didn't realize he was, not meant to be fighting and he was just there to be a medic. So there's this whole thing of them trying to haze him out and various higher-ups trying to make life hell for him and him persevering and saying, I'm not going to quit. And it's this whole sort of look at what a great test of character, this guy's such a great guy. Now, I've got to mention it. Alan's favourite thing in the world, Vince Vaughn plays the R. Lee Ermey character in this film, the boot camp sergeant.
No way.
And it is one
Are
of
you
the...
kidding?
Nope. And it is one of
God.
It might be the worst bit of casting I have ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I've got to agree with that.
He is so miscast in this film.
This doesn't
no
make any
idea.
sense, does it?
I don't mind Vince Vaughn. Like, he's fine. You know, chuck him opposite Owen Wilson in a,
But that's it, like,
comedy and it's all right. But
Vince Vaughn does one thing very well.
Yeah.
And it's not this character.
this is him trying to do something he doesn't normally do. And he can't do it. He's meant to be playing this intimidating, hardcore, like, army sergeant, but one who's got a kind of heart of gold buried away down beneath and really cares about his soldiers. But you can never buy him as remotely intimidating. So the minute he comes in, you go, this guy's got a heart of gold. He cares about these guys. But then he's yelling at them, and then he's constantly making cracks about, little army jokes about their mums and stuff. And then that just feels like Vince Vaughn being sarcastic in Dodgeball or something. And the whole thing just doesn't work at all. And there's bits when he's shouting in their face, and it's laughable. It's like, well...
But it's, obviously, the go-to reference here is Ali Ermey, as you said, in Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
And that is your quintessential drill sergeant. That
Yeah.
is exactly what you need. If you can't get Ali Ermey because he's too old or he might be
Yeah.
dead now, you get someone who can do that.
And my understanding is Ali Ermey was a real drill sergeant.
Exactly, and we all
that
know
they cast in the
that
part.
story, but of how he got that part, and because he could do all that. But we know that now, and you can't half-ass that, and you can't
Exactly.
Yeah, Vince Vaughn just doesn't work, and they don't even let him be Vince Vaughn. If he'd done it in a kind of quick-witted, quick-firing quips kind of way, then maybe it could have worked, like at a slightly different angle. But it just God.
He is really bad, and this whole romantic subplot. I was complaining about films based on real life before. This film is one of the worst offenders I've seen in a while, because the romantic subplot is a big part of this film. It goes nowhere. It adds nothing. It shouldn't have been there, other than establishing that he's got like someone at home to care about, which they could have done without. She pops up repeatedly, and then there's a whole bit where they're meant to be getting married, and they won't let him out of the army, and it adds nothing. It adds nothing, and it's just handled atrociously, and it just shouldn't be there. The character shouldn't be in the film, frankly. Or if she is, she should have just been there waving him off.
And in the first bit where they're just getting together and they're going on dates and stuff, and so there's no point where you go, oh, right, now she's starting to get to know him, she falls for him. It just goes from, like, he's a weird, creepy guy to, okay, let's get married. And then, and all the points, the actor who's playing the woman, whenever she's in the scenes, she seems kind of awkward and uncomfortable, but I don't think the character's supposed to be that. I think it's the actor, because it's such a bad script, and she's acting against someone who's being so terrible. So
and there is no chemistry between the two of them as well. It's and again, Andrew Garfield, the Amazing Spider-Man films are shit, but his chemistry with Emma Stone, who I believe they were like actually romantically involved in real life, so maybe it doesn't quite count, but the chemistry those two share in those films is wonderful. He clearly can do this kind of romantic banter interplay very well, but in this film it is just it's cringy. But anyway, they get to the boot camp, and then suddenly the film switches gear, and tonally it starts to feel like a comedy, but I don't think it's ever intentional. But just the way it's shot, the way it's put together, feels like a comedy. And this film is tonally all over the place.
Oh yeah, the naked guy.
Yeah,
I forgot about that.
But what?
There's a bit where they're doing like the General Army stuff, where they're going over the assault course and doing drills and stuff, but one of them's naked.
And that's funny.
Vince Vaughn makes fun of him a bit for being naked, and
well, it's just because when Vince Vaughn comes in, he's like, everybody stand to attention. He's naked at the time, and so he's like, oh god, jump to attention naked. And then Vince Vaughn goes, well, if you like being naked, get out there and be naked. And
there's a lot of stupid comedy like that though in this whole bit, and I don't know if it's meant to just be like, hey, it's these guys being lads, but like there's two guys who are playing a game where they like throw a knife at each other. That's like the whole game from what I can gather. And when Vince Vaughn walks in, they all look up and the guy throws the knife into this guy's foot, and he sort of goes, oh! And they have to stand up for attention, and Vince Vaughn is, getting in his face, and he's like, cadet, why is there a knife in your foot? Or whatever. and he just has to it's so weird. And again, you don't know quite how it's meant to be taken, because it is funny, or at least clearly comedic, but it's come after a load of drama with no comedy whatsoever. And like I said, I'll talk about this as we carry on, because this film's tone is all over the fucking place, all over the shop. Because basically then after the second act with him in the boot camp, they go to war, they go to fight, and then it transitions into a horror film. And it is shot...
A horror film?
It's not meant to be, but it is shot and crafted, at least for the first 5 or 10 minutes, like an Evil Dead movie. And it's bad filmmaking, because it's the wrong decisions being made. But there are all these sequences, like there are shots of these decaying corpses with rats dropped on them that are like obviously pretty like nicely cared for pet rats, and not particularly crummy, and guys with maggots in their face, and they're clearly
it's supposed
trying
to be the horrors
show,
of war.
I was going to say it's meant to be the horrors of war, but it feels like pulpy horror cinema, and then he like ducks down on this guy's corpse, and the guy like jumps up screaming because he's still alive, goes and the camera like crash zooms on his face, and it's like watching Ash in the Evil Dead movies. Yeah, it's like watching Bruce Campbell stub his toe. And everything about how it's shot is like this bizarre horror comedy, but it's obviously not meant to be handled that way. And later on in the war sequences, there are literal jump scares. There's a bit where Andrew Garfield is, trying to avoid being found by the Japanese soldiers that are coming in, and he turns a corner, and there's a guy who's hanged himself, a Japanese soldier who's hanged himself there. And there's, the sharp bit of violin music, the zoom in on the guy's face. He goes, oh, it's a jump scare. And it's not an appropriate place to use it. And this whole bit in the war, like, some of it's meant to be harrowing war stuff, but some of it feels like horror, some of it feels like comedy, and it's not an appropriate place for it. And I just think that's Mel Gibson doesn't understand how to make a film. That's all I can assume. He's obviously seen these techniques used in films and thinks, oh, well, this other film did that, so we can kind of do that. But he doesn't seem to understand what that's going to convey and what that is going to make the film feel like. And it's... Oh, it's a fucking mess tonally. But anyway, yeah, he goes out to war. People start getting shot.
This is the kind of the coup de grace of the film, because it's what this guy did, and this is the true story. He kind of scours the battlefield and helps save these wounded soldiers who had kind of been deserted because everyone had to retreat. He stays there.
Everyone goes home overnight, and they're like, hey, what happened to, the medic? Did we lose him? And he's like, no, he's still out there bringing people back. And they're like,
and
what?
he saves like 75 people's lives. I think that's the true
just
story. Just
dragging them from the film, including some Japanese soldiers as well.
I tell you what, I did like that bit where someone reports back and he goes, oh yeah, he's been sending out guys all night, including a couple of Japs. They didn't make it. And I kind of like that. It was kind of acknowledgement that he was saving whoever he found, Japanese soldiers, but then they weren't getting cared for when they were like that and they didn't care.
Wow.
And it was just that one little line, but I kind of like that truth. I like that honesty about it.
Yeah. But then, and this is the real ethical problem I have with this film, to be honest, is they kind of go in and beat a load of Japanese people, and there's this whole sequence of them like on fire because is it a bomb that's gone off or something? There's this whole sequence with swelling, triumphant music, and you're meant to be like really happy and like, hooray, they've done it, they've saved the day, and you're just watching Japanese soldiers on fire, running, screaming, and it's so uneasy. That's it.
That is a change in our society that I suspect that Mel Gibson's not aware of, that we don't see war in the same way of good versus evil anymore.
And it completely undermines the message of the film, which is, and this is what I mean, I think Mel Gibson doesn't believe in the message of the film, because it's clearly meant to be a triumph for pacifism and for peace, and and then to have this whole sequence of we're killing the Japs, hooray! It's like, it's really uneasy. But I've vented pretty much all of the flaws and complaints I have with this film at this point, and I must say, it's pretty entertaining. It clearly means well, even if it is ethically a bit muddled.
But I'm not even sure what principle he was trying to prove, because it's like, if you don't want to kill people, don't join the army. It's like, if you're not find a way, if you want to serve your country, like find a way to do it that doesn't involve you the necessity of you learning how to kill people. Be like an engineer or something. Build planes, like whatever you need.
What's happened here, and what the film sort of conveys, certainly, and my guess would be that the guy doesn't really have a problem with killing. The guy has a problem with the fact that the Bible says that he's not allowed to kill. So it's not that he's concerned with murder, and it's
not a moral question, is it? It's that God says don't do it, so he's not.
It's not that he has an issue with it. It's that he's trying to find a loophole in the Bible so that he can get involved. Because obviously, if God didn't want him to do that, then the Bible would have been written differently. It's this kind of muddled thinking, doublethink, that stems from the fact that the guy's, looking at it from a religious point of view rather than a moral point of view.
And I do think it would be good if he saved all these wounded people and they're all thanking him, and he just goes around going, "Yeah, enjoy your time in hell because you have murdered people. You will be damned for eternity, unlike me." So
Yeah,
I've saved your lives for now, guys. Enjoy the next 30 years because eternity is going to be hell.
Like I say, it's quite an entertaining film. The first third isn't. The middle half's a bit like. In fact, for me, the best part of the film is the sort of legal hoops that they have to jump through in proving that he's an actual pacifist and all of that. That was the most interesting part of the film. But then when they go to war, it does transition into quite like an old school Western. And there are, like I say, ethical issues with that. But just on a purely, like, the sequences of him running around trying to avoid being detected and what have you, I did find them fairly entertaining. So you're going to hate me for this, Alan, but this is yet another member of the 7 out of 10 club for me. It's a very low 7. It's the lowest 7 of the lot so far.
It's not. Make it a 6.
Just give it a 6.
It's on the cusp between a 6 and a 7. This one for me, but I could sit through it.
See, I think you liked it because it was so bad it was good. I think you're getting that out of it.
Maybe there was an element of watching a dreadful performance from Vince Vaughn being more interesting than just seeing yet another Ali Ermey knockoff. So you might be right there, actually, to be honest. Plus, like I say, there are bits that are shot exactly like Evil Dead, and anyone who knows me knows that's a shortcut to my heart. If you imitate Evil Dead in your film, I'm gonna like it on some level. So, Alan, what would you give it? 1 out of 10?
Yes, 1 out of 10.
And I mean,
it's a low one.
That's not unjustified. But it's well.
The other
shot.
thing as well,
it's well put together for the most part.
Garfield has this kind of annoyingly modern, sexy haircut all the way through it, where it's just sort of swept back with a little bit of gel.
Well, you know what annoys me is...
he should have his crew coat. What are you doing?
I wanted to check in on how bald Vince Vaughn is, but he never took his hat off.
Oh, the other thing as well that annoyed me about it, like all the war scenes particularly, they're supposed to be really gritty. I'm like, oh my god, that guy's face just blew off with a bullet. It's supposed to be really, really realistic and kind of and like Saving Private Ryan.
I was going to say it's clearly trying to emulate Saving Private Ryan at times, but it's shot in it's too light-hearted.
And you see people like being flung around on wires, like obviously like stunt work. So it doesn't feel very real in that sense.
You've just seen the horror movie, like I say, rats that are clearly like nice and clean because they're kept in a cage that have just been dropped on an extra to look like they're eating him. It's that sort of like shitty horror filmmaking.
There's a bit where it goes into slow motion as they're running at the enemy.
Oh,
and it's
God.
And it reminds me
the slow motion throughout this film is hilariously badly used.
Have you ever seen the bit at the end? At the end of Blackadder Goes Forth, where they have to go over the top.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the extended sequence where they filmed them running over the top, and they tried to film it in slow motion, but it looked so shit that they never used it because it's basically them running out and then getting shot and falling down to their deaths. But because it was such a small space they were filming in, and it was just looked really shit in slow motion, so they cut it as they didn't use it, and they cut it as they kind of go over the top. But it looks exactly like the film, the bits in Hacksaw Ridge where they're sort of slow motion running out into the thing. But the other thing annoyed me was this feeling that it's supposed to be so gritty and so real. Oh my God, war is terrible. But no one swears, no one says anything particularly racist, no one smokes.
But that is the thing, it feels very, like I say, it's a tonal mess, and that extends to the fact that none of the war plays as gritty at all.
But it's obviously supposed to.
It plays like schlock horror, it plays like comedy, it plays like kind of light-hearted adventure thriller at times. But yeah, it's everything about it. The colour palette is too bright. Like you say, it's all too clinical and not gritty. Nothing about it works particularly well. It just feels like, it almost feels like a Uwe Boll or Paul W.S. Anderson adaptation of a Call of Duty game in terms of how they would probably approach shooting it with bright colours and things. So yeah, I'm not going to contest you giving it 1 out of 10.
Wow.
So moving on, the next film, and you may be surprised to know that was the last of my 7 out of 10s.
Oh!
So the next film, Lion. This is another true life story about a kid in India who gets lost, separated from his family because he fall asleep on a train?
Yeah.
And the train goes off and then he wakes up and he's travelled however far across India and no idea where he is, and he just ends up joining the countless homeless kids in the country, and then that's part 1 of the film. It's very much a 2-act film, kind of like Full Metal Jacket, and act 2 is we join him as an adult. Oh no, before that the transition is that he's adopted by Nicole Kidman and some other guy, and goes off to live in Australia, and then act 2 is him as an adult, Dev Patel, living life and then deciding to track his home, his family down and his little village that he grew up in, and trying to find them. So Alan, you've seen it. Calvin, you don't sound like you've seen it, I assume.
No, I've not.
So again, this is one of the real Oscar contenders this year.
No.
I thought it was shit. What about you, Alan?
I wouldn't go with shit, but no, it wasn't in particular.
I thought the first half was great. The first half of the film, which is you see the kids, it's this little kid and his older brother, and you just see them going about their lives. Their lives.
Well, can I
basically.
just before you go into that, Calvin, have you seen the trailer for it by any chance?
No, I haven't.
Well, the trailer essentially is the entire story of the film and tells it in a kind of 2 minutes. It's a 2-minute story, really. It's
but that's yeah.
But the trailer makes it seem like it's the story of this adult played by Dev Patel, who kind of has to find doesn't have to, but wants to find his original family and this kind of trauma of his childhood, and you probably get some flashbacks of how he got lost and stuff. Then you sit down and watch the film, and the first half of the film, so like a good 55 minutes, is the child's story before he gets adopted. I wasn't expecting that at all. Yeah. And frankly, it could have been done in about 15-20 minutes. There
was no point to seeing all of it.
It was a good bit of filming, but
I liked it. And to be honest, if the whole film had been that, this would have been quite possibly my favourite film of the year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, obviously it would need more drama and story to it, but if it had just been about...
Because there are films like that get made.
I don't know, exactly. I've seen a few films like that, and I like that sort of thing. I like, the kids going around being kids, and I really enjoyed all of that, up until he, found his way into the orphanage, when it was just these kind of... the transition to becoming a homeless kid as well, which is obviously a real issue there. But
it takes too long to set up his sort of like, this is his normal life before...
In the context of the film, it shouldn't be that long. In the context of the story that this film is telling, it should have been 10 minutes at the start and a few flashbacks. Given that it is the first half of the film, like, for me, that was the interesting story. And then we get to the second half of the story, which is kind of the plot kicks in, and Dev Patel starts to look for his home where he was taken away from. And this is a perfect example of why basing films on real life is a really bad idea. Again, because what happens is Dev Patel decides he wants to track his family down and find his home village, and someone says, "Oh, there's this new thing, Google Maps. You should Google Earth. You should have a look. You can see everything around the world there." And he goes, "Oh, great.
Oh, I've heard of this film. Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't realize this was the one where Dev Patel used Google Earth. Yeah. I remember there was a bit of a hoo-ha about it. Has that only just been released?"
Essentially, he goes, "Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I might do that, actually, yeah." And then he does it. And then he walks to, he goes to India, and then 10 minutes later he's in his home village, and his mum comes out, and there's no conflict. The closest thing to conflict is that it's going to take him a while to look through everywhere on Google Earth because it's a big place. But there's no real conflict there because if the conflict in your film is this is going to take this character a while to do and it's going to be a bit of hard work, that isn't real conflict because especially when you gloss over it with a montage and then they inject some conflict, which I suspect is completely artificial and didn't happen in real life, in the form of they play it like it's this big deal that if his mum finds out he's looking up his, heritage and where he comes from, she's going to take it as an insult against her parenting. Why am I not a good enough mother for you? And it's played like this thing that he's got to keep secret from her. But obviously she's not going to think that. Any reasonable adoptive parent who knows that like a kid at the age of like, what is he, 8 years old, something like that, is taken away. Yeah. All right, but certainly old enough to remember his family. Anyone who adopts a kid and then they grow up and then they're like, you know what, I should really try and find my home village and stuff. Like, no one in their right mind's going to be offended by that. The character that's painted is that of someone who would be supportive of that. But they clearly needed some conflict for the character. So there's this really artificial sort of thing where he's got to try and keep it secret that he's looking from her, and then ultimately it doesn't amount to anything because she doesn't care.
When she finds out, she's just like, "Oh, I hope you find out."
Yeah, because obviously she would be. And so that's it. And then he, like I say, he goes to India. 10 minutes later, he's in his village, and his mum comes out, and they have a hug. End.
And then what I liked about it though is that this couple they adopt 2 Indian boys. And like one of them, like he turns out to be this kind of very smart. He goes, he gets educated and all that, and he ends up writing a book about his life. But then the other one's a bit of a dud. And like they can't get rid of it. It's just a bit like, oh shit! No, he got one crap one as well. We should have vetted these better.
But the thing is, I mean, it certainly seems like a great, remarkable real life story. But that doesn't translate to filmmaking. That isn't. It's not a good film story. It doesn't work as a film. It's just a series of events.
I don't know if it is that remarkable a story either.
It would have been a good BuzzFeed article if it had existed back in 2008. I don't know if it did. Alan, what would you give it out of 10?
I give it 6. It was, it's an engaging story. I don't think it was particularly great, but like you said, the early bits with the kids is really nicely shot, and it sort of gets a good snapshot into that kind of life.
It's very low on dialogue as well. The early stuff, which I liked. It's kind of there's a lot of telling the story with just visuals that's going on, which I'm usually quite a big fan of. So yeah, you gave it 6 out of 10. I give this one a 5 out of 10.
My God.
Not even a 7. Not even a low 7.
First half was great.
7 for the first half.
Second half, bullshit. So now, Calvin,
yes,
you can join in the discussion here. Manchester by the Sea, which I believe you've seen.
Yes, I have. I watched it yesterday, in fact.
Yeah. So this is a film that's been getting a hell of a lot of buzz for ages. It was on my radar from it feels like over a year ago when it was making some film festival appearances and people were going on about how great it is. And the story is, it's kind of just a drama about this guy who's a bit of a low life nothing. He's a janitor, and then it turns out when his brother dies, that his nephew's kind of been left to him, like he's been named as like the guardian in the will, and he's sort of a bit like, wait, what?
Yeah,
he's thrown into this situation where he has to. I
was hoping at that point, I was hoping the film to turn into a kind of Adam Sandler, Reese Witherspoon, now I have to learn how to be a parent kind of thing, but it didn't.
Yeah.
Well, what I thought of this film was basically I enjoyed it. It was a good film, but completely unremarkable. Really straight down the middle, wasn't it? And what I didn't like about it was how it kind of used flashbacks to drip feed in the backstory. Yeah. Which made it feel really cheap. It like the way it played like a murder mystery, like suspense story with the emotional. Like that means you have no faith in the story because you haven't a drip feed it in because it doesn't hold its own weight.
I mean, I really didn't like it, to be honest. I thought it was really dull. I was on board for like 20 minutes or so at the start when it was fairly engaging, but it was just that thing where it just went on and on.
Yeah, nothing much happened.
And it was it just felt very insincere to me, to be honest. Like, I know you said it wasn't made as an awards grab, but I think it was clearly made as a grab at credibility, if nothing else, for Casey Affleck, and who's been, he's probably going to win the Oscar this year for Best Lead Actor. But I mean, there's nothing.
Oh, whoa, really? Do you think?
I mean,
Who's he
again,
up against?
unremarkable, I would say.
But that's it.
Ryan Gosling, Andrew Garfield, Viggo Mortensen, and Denzel Washington.
It might go to Ryan Gosling, but I think it's between the two of them. But the thing is, there's nothing remarkable about his performance here. Like, he's fine, he's competent, but he's not particularly engaging. Or
do you know how much of if there was a lot of improvisation in this film? Because it struck me that it's quite a long film for what it is.
Felt like
there were so many bits of dialogue that just had. There's the bit when they're in the hospital and Casey Affleck's brother is being diagnosed with this heart condition, and it's like you've got 5 to 10 years to live, and there's just exchanges of dialogue that just don't do anything, and I don't know if it's funny or not. Like, they have this doctor come in and they say, thanks for seeing to him, Beth. And she says, no, it's Bethany. And say, oh, sorry. Oh, no, it's okay. And then it was just is that supposed to be funny, or is it highlighting awkwardness? I don't know, it just didn't seem to do anything, and there were so many moments like that throughout the film. I'm just like, what is this?
And it's annoying, because I did really like some of the earlier scenes. I like the scene with him dealing with that woman's shower, and she's sort of trying to seduce him or something. It's really weirdly played, but that sort of thing I thought was quite interesting. But and then it just transitioned into this very standard, he's got to learn to look after his nephew and grow up and be a provider, and it was just so, like I say, it just felt so insincere. It didn't feel like anyone involved wanted to tell this story. It felt like they thought, well, I've kind of got a bit of real life experience I can draw on here, and people will like this because it's the sort of thing that does well as a film. It didn't feel like there was any legitimate passion behind it, and I completely agree. I really didn't like it. It wound me up because of that. It just felt, like I say, insincere. And for all my complaints, it's competently well made and what have you. So it's a 6 out of 10 from me. Oh, because objectively speaking, there's nothing particularly wrong with it, even though it really aggravated me on a more personal level. But it's very unremarkable, and it has no place at the Oscars. Frankly, it's a sort of thing that should have done well at the, I don't know, Tribeca Film Festival or whatever it was, some film festival somewhere.
Yeah, an indie film.
I've never kind of gone beyond that.
Yeah, this is the sort of film you see and go, oh, that was kind of interesting. I'd be interested to see what the writer does next, or maybe
exactly. That's exactly it. But yeah, what would you give it out of 10, Alan?
7.
And Calvin?
5 from me.
Oh wow.
I was just thoroughly bored and miserable throughout the experience.
If I was rating it purely on my own personal thoughts towards it, it would probably be more like a 4 out of 10 from me. But I'm trying to be a bit reasonable and objective, and it's not badly made. It's just very kind of.
Oh no, it's competently made. Yeah. But I was just
Okay, so 2 left. So the film that. Essentially, if La La Land doesn't win, which it obviously is going to win, then the film that will upset that win is going to be Moonlight.
Now, I'm so disappointed that I haven't seen this yet. This is the only one other than La La Land that I'm genuinely excited to see. I really want to see this
Is that because of the gay element?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Calvin, are you gay?
No, and just because I've heard generally good buzz about it, and it seems to, I've seen the trailer. It looks beautiful.
This is another film, actually, that there's a lot of weird 2 or 3 act structures going on in the Oscars this year. This is another one of them. It's very much it's 3 distinct chapters in this guy's life. You see him as a kid, you see him as a teenager, you see him as an adult, played by a different actor each time. And essentially, it's this kid who finds that he's gay and then kind of grows up and he has a friend, and the friend's also gay or certainly experimenting, and he grows up as well. And I don't know, it's kind of, Yeah, I don't know. What did you make of it, Alan?
I really liked it. In fact, of all the nominated films, this is my favourite.
Really?
I think this is the best film.
This might be my least favourite film out of the nominees this year.
It's because you're a homophobe and a racist.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's it.
No, I really liked it.
I hated it. I thought the first third with him as a kid had nothing at all to offer me. It was boring, didn't need to be there for the sake of the plot. The only part that really had any relevance to the story was the final third act with him as an adult. And obviously, it set one or two elements up in the other bits, but I just, like I say, him as a kid I thought was bollocks, added nothing. Him as a teenager, I just didn't care. I just thought this guy's a knobhead, and obviously he's going through some tough times, but like, whatever. It was only when we met him as an adult and we kind of saw what he'd become that I was sort of remotely interested in any of it, and it was too little too late for me, really. I don't know. I mean, like you said before, Alan, you like films where nothing happens, so
Yeah.
is that why you like this film?
I think I understand what you're saying. Is like I think I saw it as three kind of distinct chapters.
Yeah.
That are limitedly connected. Obviously, the main character throughout, but you're seeing the growth of this person. But
I mean, the first two chapters inform how you read the last chapter, but that is about as far as it goes. And to be honest, I probably would have preferred it if the last chapter was the bulk of the film and there were one or two flashbacks dropped in to him in his youth, just to kind of establish. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, that was it. I think that's kind of. I think it's supposed to be. It's bigger than the character. I think there's a lot of relatable elements to this story that I imagine. I don't really know, but I guess particularly if you grow up like in a poor black neighborhood, there's probably a lot of things you can relate to about the kind of the sense of limited life options and kind of a difficult home life, and then the homosexuality thing, which is barely even played in that first chapter because he's 10 years old or whatever.
Yeah.
There's this sense that other people perceive him as differently. His mother sort of sees it, the other boys see it, and they pick on him for it, and it makes him very introspective and withdrawn. I don't know, it felt bigger picture to me. I wasn't particularly worried about this one character. It felt like it was telling a broader story.
But I mean, you were just complaining about unnecessary it was to watch 50 minutes of like the kid in Lion at the start. Do you not think this was unnecessary? Like, we could have had 3 minutes of it?
Well, I think that's the difference between when a story engages you or not. I think, I think you can get away with a film that meanders and does nothing if it engages you.
Well, that's it. I was engaged in the first half of Lion. I wasn't engaged in the first third of this at all. The second third was a lot more interesting because there was actually some like story beginning to form. So he's a teenager in the second chapter, and he's dealing with, again, how people perceive him being a bit feminine and accusing him of being gay, and his relationship with girls and that sort of thing. And it was a bit more interesting, but I still just, I don't know, it left me cold. I got nothing from it. I just thought it was so boring that, like I said, the protagonist I just thought was a knobhead. I had no reason to really sympathise with him other than people treated him badly.
I don't know if... Yeah, I mean, you have sympathy for him. I don't know if I empathise with him particularly. But like I said, I don't think I was focusing on that character particularly, which I know doesn't make sense because he's the whole thing that runs through it. Yeah, I don't know. I felt like it was telling more of a story about this world and this sort of snapshot of life that frankly doesn't get much attention in the world of film. And so that was kind of interesting and new. And like I said earlier about Hidden Figures and one of the other ones, this is films about black people, about black issues that are not just about being black and that have now other elements. So I think that's obviously a step forward, that just being black isn't enough of an issue anymore. We've got to a point where we can start exploring subcultures within that, which I think is good. I think that's probably means we're going in the right direction with that. And but the one thing is that the fact that he's gay, or at least he seems to definitely think he is, it's actually really downplayed in the film. It never quite realizes itself.
I don't know about that.
It's like it's not it doesn't feel like a film about a guy struggling with being gay or questioning about it.
I disagree.
It's
completely.
very underplayed.
It feels like it's an exploration of this guy and how he grows up, and it feels like his sexuality is a hugely informing part of that. Because the third act is essentially we find him as an adult, and he's become this. You're kind of led to believe he's going to be a weedy little gay guy as an adult, but he's become a kind of stereotypical gangster drug dealer with a flash car and a grill, and he's become this kind of hard guy who's feared and respected by other gangster types. And the one thing I will say for those two sequences leading into it is that they inform that and make that play very differently than if you just thought he was a conventional straight guy, I suppose, because you start reading into it, well, is he gone the other way and become really masculine to prove something, to throw people off the scent? Is he fighting back against, you know what I mean? Is this pushback, or is this kind of how he would have always grown up? I don't know. And essentially the third act is that he goes and meets up with his old friend who he had an experience with in his youth, and his friends, you know, a lot more conventionally what you'd expect.
I thought the performance of that guy was great in that bit, because he's playing like this hard guy, this like very kind of stereotypical gangster guy, but then it does feel softer. It does feel like he's hiding something, or that he's projecting something.
The first point in the film where any of the acting stood out to me was the last third. The two actors, the main guy and his friend, are brilliant in that last third. They're the only actors that I can really single out and say anything special about in this film. But
did you not fantastic. Like what's his name in the first part? The adult in the first part. The one who's been nominated for whatever.
He's
He's
fine.
a really good actor.
He was fine.
Mahershala Ali, that's him.
And, you know, I like him, but there was nothing about his performance that struck
me. I was
very
sad that kind of character never came back, and we sort of never learned what happened to him. And that had to be a deliberate choice.
That would have made that first act relevant. I don't know. I like I say, I quite enjoyed the last third, but it was far too little too late. And the first two thirds were mind-numbingly dull for me. I just didn't care at all.
I think, I mean, I didn't find it boring. I found it just an interesting character piece, I guess, or a kind of, but not, like I say, not even necessarily about that central character, but more about that world in which he lives. And we've kind of, again, we've moved on from this kind of like ghetto gangster culture to this more introspective, like, okay, what are the details of that? Well, how does drugs affect the community? How do people who deal drugs then placate themselves with having to live alongside those people and that sort of thing? I found all that very interesting.
Yeah. Again, I found it interesting, but it was only stuff that I could find interesting in the last third when it kind of came together. And like I say, I just...
But like, to be honest with you, I probably found the last third the least engaging in that sense.
Really?
It was more about character, because it was that third part is all about him and all about that relationship with that other guy, and that's the culmination of it. And like I say, I don't think that was the element that I was particularly engaged by, and I still liked that, and it completed that story. I think it was, you know, the bigger world that was pulling me in those earlier parts. It's a shame you haven't seen it, Calvin. I would be interested to see.
Yeah, I'd be very interested.
A homosexual perspective on it.
Yeah,
in terms of, especially in terms of having to kind of hide it, I guess, or be afraid of it in some way. Which I don't know if you ever were, Calvin. I know you weren't exactly brought up on the mean streets, were you?
Well, exactly. I mean, I am interested in it from that perspective more than anything else. And like you say, like in this drug environment and all that kind of stuff.
Wasn't there something, Calvin, when you were younger where you like... your mum found that you'd been like looking at gay porn or something, and you had to like pretend that you'd been searching for Octopussy or something, and it had brought some dodgy pictures up? Wasn't there something like that?
In my defense, when I Google searched Pussy Galore, when I Google searched Pussy Galore, it did come up with some stuff.
Anyway, that would be straight porn, wouldn't it?
No, oddly enough, it wasn't.
Okay. That was it. You found this like James Bond search term that you could use to summon some gay porn. That was it, wasn't it?
Summon.
But you kept going back to that like search term. I remember you telling me. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
How gay were you when you were 6, Calvin?
Oh no, there is a video of me somewhere as like a 7-year-old like dancing to Spice Girls and doing the moves in front of the TV, and I'm so like, huh, wow, okay,
You really are born with it.
I would be very interested to know your thoughts on it, actually, Calvin. I'm sure you will watch it at some point, so let us know.
Yes.
My guess is that you won't like it, but I might be completely wrong.
But the thing is, Calvin's not homophobic like you, but he is racist, so...
That's true.
Oh my god. Jesus.
Yeah. He's not only racist, but classist as well. Calvin is terrified of the working class. Yeah. So, Alan, I reckon this is going to be like a really high number for you. I reckon 9 or 10 even. What did you give it out to?
No, it's an 8. It's an 8.
Oh, okay.
It was this one and Fences were my favourite. And I think this one is better just on the basis that it's more filmic and it's telling a story that is not as often told. But in terms of personal enjoyment, those two are my favourites.
It's a 5 out of 10 from me. Didn't like it. Well, moving on to our final Best Picture nominee, the one that's obviously going to win, La La Land. All three of us have seen this one, I believe.
Yes.
So, in case anyone listening doesn't know, La La Land is a unashamedly, or an unabashed sort of throwback to 1950s Hollywood musicals, created in, exactly the same style, really, just with modern filmmaking techniques. That's essentially it. It just chronicles the romance between a man and a woman who are both aspiring artists in Hollywood, and one's an actor, one's a musician.
Well, I think what you've done there is, with your description, is highlighted one of my main problems with it, is that this was done 60 years ago, many times, so why are we doing it again, without adding anything?
I must admit, whilst I love the film, and this is by far my favourite of this year's Best Picture nominees, I think it's going to deserve its win that it's going to get. It could have been better. I love Damien Chazelle. I thought his previous film, Whiplash, was phenomenal, and that should have won Best Picture that year, frankly. Whiplash is an incredible bit of filmmaking. It's a sort of film that you watch and it's depressingly well made, because it's on every level. The editing in that film is like outstanding, and I wouldn't even normally notice editing, the cinematography, the acting, just everything about it. And La La Land, I wasn't really into it for the first... Again, this is yet another film in chapters. I've just realised it's segmented into the seasons of the year, and kind of like the film spring, summer, autumn, winter, and spring. We do, winter, spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, the next one is like a few years down the line, isn't it?
So the first 3 didn't really do anything for me. I just wasn't that bothered. I was just
That's a big old chunk of the film, though.
To say you loved it.
Yeah, well, the first 3 were just kind of like I was sat there watching it. But the thing is, I adore musicals. It's one of my favourite genres, but I don't really like 1950s musicals. I like show tunes. I don't like jazz. I don't like the style of music in this film. The only point at which the music really came to life for me is when he is on stage with that guy that he's resisted getting involved with, John Legend, and John Legend performs this modern interpretation of jazz, and I really like that.
That was the problem with that scene, because that was supposed to show how he'd sold out to modern music, but it was the best song in the whole film.
Exactly.
No. I disagree. I don't think it was making. I think it was open for interpretation. She definitely wasn't going for it. She thought he'd sold out. But I don't think we were supposed to necessarily be with her. I think it's a bit more open than that.
Well, to be honest, I kind of took it like she was a bit overwhelmed by the success he was having as well. I took it in 2 levels, because she gets basically really overwhelmed in that sequence, and I think part of it is the idea that he's sold out, but I think part of it is she kind of, essentially what happens for the rest of the film kind of flashes before her eyes, and she just sees what's going to happen.
She's just really jealous.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question, though, about the music?
Yes.
Can one of you just hum one of the songs?
Are you kidding? Because, I got the soundtrack. I've been listening to
I could
it
hum
for the
City of Stars, but that is the one... That is the one song. Yeah, Calvin, could you hum a song other than City of Stars?
That's the only one I can think of right now. What's the other one?
Bear in mind that you've listened to the soundtrack many times, apparently.
Yeah.
Bum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum.
That's Chicago.
Bum bum ba-dum bum. That's the one that she sings with the mates before they go
that was
out.
dreadful.
But my point is,
No!
Calvin, that you've obviously listened to it, fair enough. But the songs were just instantly forgettable.
Yeah.
As far as I was concerned, there was nothing catchy about them.
Yeah.
Which not all songs have to
Disagree.
be catchy, but I think in a musical there should be a couple that,
in this sort
stick
of
with you.
stop-start musical as well. This isn't a kind of operatic style like Les Miserables or something where the songs kind of
storytelling songs
come in and out of dialogue and it's all sewn in, which I can get away with less catchy music in. Although for the record, I think the music in Les Miserables wonderful.
But there aren't actually that many songs in the film. There's 5?
Well, exactly,
maybe?
and they're all in the first 25 minutes.
I didn't feel like the film needed to be a musical. It just felt like it felt kind of like The Artist. It just felt like a gimmick that was thrown in on top of this film. And there is a reason for it. It's because the final sequence of the film, the final dance number, which is, I mean, I loved for the record, but the entire film is built around this third act, this final moment, and it's all reverse engineered to set that up. And a lot of it, the fact that it's a musical, is only there to justify that sort of old school dream dance sequence, really. And yeah, I don't know.
But let me tell you my kind of issues with it. First, let me say I did think Emma Stone was fantastic, actually, and I've seen her in a few things, but I've never seen her given much of a chance to do anything. So that was nice to see. I was surprised by that. Ryan Gosling, I felt, wasn't doing anything special at all, and his singing voice was certainly not strong enough, nowhere near.
That was interesting, actually. I thought that none of the people were and I thought it was quite an interesting choice that they clearly didn't cast people on the strength of their singing ability.
And if you're gonna emulate these classic golden age musicals and you're gonna put the ballet sequence in at the end, then you need a Gene Kelly, you need a Fred Astaire. You can't just get these people who are doing mediocre dance. You need the best dancers that are out there.
I'm all for, that kind of rough and ready approach to singing in a musical. I think it's got its place. Les Miserables doesn't have the best singing in that film adaptation.
Because the acting...
And there's pros and cons to that, but it's acting first, performance first. There's a lot of instances of that in musicals and film where I think it was the right approach to go with an actor first and a singer second rather than the other way around. But, like you say, this is emulating to the point that it's almost a spoof those kind of 1950s musicals. So it should have been the other way around. It should have been, let's cast like you say, a Gene Kelly or what have you. Do you know, actually... I
think you're overstating the singing abilities of Gene Kelly and Bing Crosby
but the
and all that
dancing
kind. I think they're acceptable crooners.
Yeah.
But
I'm talking about Gene Kelly in terms of dancing, actually.
Yeah, in terms of dancing
singing.
as well.
Oh, okay.
And Fred Astaire.
Sure.
Fred Astaire was too old and not pretty enough to be a leading man, but he could dance like a demon, so that's why he was there.
And I must say, whenever there was a dance sequence in this film, I just switched off. It was, apart from the one at the end, because that's plot driving. Whenever the film stopped to just do a bit of dancing, it was like... Ugh. And, I mean, to be honest, that's true of the old 1950s musicals as well, but at least in...
Yeah, God, An American in Paris is about 20 minutes worth of story stretched
But
out
at least
for
in
2
Singing
hours.
in the Rain, I could kind of go, well, this is pretty good dancing, even if I'm bored by it. Whereas in this, it was like, yeah, I could probably learn that if I had, a week of rehearsal to, I don't know.
I mean, it was obviously An American in Paris that this was doing at the end there because, of, that huge ballet sequence at the end. But interestingly enough, because we were doing the Oscars episode, I went and looked at my ratings for films that have previously won Best Picture, including An American in Paris, and it's one of the lowest on the list. I gave An American in Paris 4 out of 10.
I think I gave that film a 5 out of 10, if I remember An American in Paris. I'm not a fan.
Because I guess it's not my cup of tea, generally, I suppose. Yeah. But also, La La Land was really unbalanced. The beginning was really song heavy, and then they kind of forgot about all the songs to get some plot in at the last 40 minutes. The story itself was... when the story kicked in, I was a bit more engaged in this emotional story that wasn't doing anything particularly interesting.
It was the last 2 seasons for me when I suddenly clicked into really liking the film, which I think is when Ryan Gosling's career begins to take off and their relationship begins to fall apart, and then the ending of the film, and that's what I loved. And I mean, spoilers for those who haven't seen it, but essentially the final part of the film is this extended. It's set in the future. These two characters who've been set up as lovers for the entire film are. Well, we flash forward because they both, their careers take off and it kind of separates them from each other. They can't really stick together. And then years down the line, Emma Stone's, is she married to another guy? She's got a kid with another guy. Ryan Gosling's off on his own and they kind of have a chance encounter and he plays a bit of music and we just kind of see inside his head or her head this kind of dream sequence that just recaps the entirety of their relationship but then projects forward what it might have been.
But a relationship that was dependent on him not being successful.
Yes.
Her fantasy relationship with him.
Yes.
Which I thought was interesting, but I think that's very honest and very real, but I don't think it was really presented as such. It was kind of presented as this kind of happy fantasy.
No, I think that ending is fucking heartbreaking. That is why I love the film, because it becomes this Jacques Demy Umbrellas of Cherbourg romantic tragedy.
You love Umbrellas of Cherbourg, don't you?
I do. I think it's phenomenal. but it is. It turns from this joyous 1950s American Hollywood homage into what I think is quite a conscious take on the sort of French side of things. Like I say, it's heartbreaking.
Do you think it's because of that ending that it's getting all this awards, buzz?
I don't know.
I was watching it and sort of thinking, okay, well, it's nice. It's I loved it. It's a lovely musical and nice dancing and stuff. But if they'd have just gotten together at the end and had a happy ending, would the film be this highly regarded? I don't
Maybe
think
not
so.
as highly regarded, but I think it would certainly be a Best Picture nominee. The Oscars love this shit. Like I say, The Artist was nothing special. Have you both seen The Artist?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the only other Best Picture winner for the past 20 years I actually like.
But do you like it? Well, I mean, I don't dislike The Artist.
I've got it. Yeah, I love it.
But it's just a bog standard drama. But it's shot like a silent film. And even then, it doesn't really fully embrace the fact that it's a silent film because it's got loads of dialogue in it. By which I mean, for those who haven't seen it, title cards pop up with writing on it, which silent films avoided.
But that was my problem with The Artist. It didn't embrace the fact that it was silent. It just created a story that they could tell without dialogue.
Exactly. But it isn't told without dialogue, and it should have been told more visually.
Methodology to telling a visual story.
Yeah. But as it was just like a kind of spoof movie.
My main problem with The Artist is that despite it being, a silent film and stuff, they felt the need to set it in the 1920s, 1930s. I would have kind of been more interested just to have a contemporary silent film.
Actually,
do it in colour if you want, but I
think it was in Frasier.
No.
Ooh, is that going to segue into yet another one of my patented Frasier pictures? Patent pending.
Yeah, so with La La Land, basically, I didn't hate it. You know what I mean? I'm kind of being the voice of negativity on this one, but it felt unbalanced. I felt like it didn't really know what it was trying to do. Like it was trying to be this classic Hollywood, but not.
Yeah, I do agree to a part.
It felt messy to me, and I didn't think the performances were good enough. Although I really loved Emma Stone, and that's kind of woken me up to her. Like that she might actually throw out some really great performances in future. Hopefully,
I think she's going to win the Oscar for this one,
and I think she deserves to be honest, based on the films that I've seen. I don't think Ryan Gosling deserves to win, but I don't think he will. To be honest,
didn't do anything. Didn't do anything interesting at all.
And that's not there was nothing wrong with his performance.
Yeah.
But
before these two got cast, it was going to be Miles Teller.
That's what I wanted
Emma
to
Watson.
mention. Yeah. Now Miles Teller was
what a different film.
Yeah,
that
Miles Teller was the lead in Whiplash. Damien Chazelle, the writer and director's prior film, and so I can see why that was going to happen. He's keeping his same creative team. J.K. Simmons also has a nice little cameo appearance in this. Actually, is one of the highlights of the film. So Miles Teller and Emma Watson were both originally certainly courted for the leads in this film. And like you say, what a different film that would have been. Miles Teller is fine. He's pretty good in Whiplash. The scenes get stolen by J.K. Simmons, so it's difficult to really judge. But he's not a Ryan Gosling. He's I think he's got a lot of musical training behind him. So that might have played into it in some capacity. But Emma Watson is shit. as we've spoken about before.
Well
Emma
established.
Watson is not a talented actor, and she would have ruined this film. I cannot see why anyone would want her. She turned this down to do Beauty and the Beast, which I think she's probably quite upset about.
Well, I kind of like, because I read an interview where the director or someone was talking about this, and they said that even though I don't think there's much of an age difference between Emma Watson and Emma Stone, I think Emma Stone might just be a couple of years older, but Emma Stone looks older and acts more mature. So if you have Miles Teller and Emma Watson in there, they probably play as early 20s, just starting out. With Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling, you've got people who are already kind of should be established. Like, they should be sort of settling into their roles in life around this point. They've still not quite made it, and I think that gives the film an extra something.
Emma Stone's like our age, isn't she, Calvin?
Yeah.
You are getting a bit old now, guys, though. I mean, it's time to decide what you're doing with
I'm thinking more for you, Alan.
I'm fine.
What? I've given up though, so I've come out the other side. I've been through it and just given up on it altogether. I'm doing this now. I'm a podcaster.
I think the craftsmanship, the sort of technical side of it, did a lot to take me through the first half of the film. And then we got to the second half of the film, or last third maybe, to be honest, and I really started to click with it. And that is because up until then it was very, they were down on their luck and their careers weren't going that well, but it was very light and pretty happy, and they were falling in love. But it's only like after that the real conflict in the film starts to come out, and that is when it becomes interesting for me. And I don't know, I ultimately I loved it, but if it weren't for that ending, I wouldn't.
If you like this guy, this Damien Chazelle, then this is not a good sign, because there's things that are very wrong with this film that he's being told is the best film. So he's going to repeat those mistakes. I think you.
I love him because of Whiplash. Like I say, I think Whiplash it's a damn near perfect film in terms of how it's made. Everything about that film, the writing in that film is incredible. It's one of those screenplays where every scene, has some sort of purpose. Nothing outstays its welcome. It's all so meticulously well written. And I think the guy's a great writer. And he wrote 10 Cloverfield Lane as well, which I've now seen, which I thought was great fun. Really enjoyed it. He's got a lot of interesting writing credits under his belt, actually. He wrote The Last Exorcism Part 2, which I haven't seen. I imagine it's not great, but and he wrote that film Grand Piano. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Never heard of it.
I've been meaning to watch it for a while, but it fell off my radar until recently. It's basically sold as Die Hard on a piano. Elijah Wood has to give a concert, like a performance on a piano, and if he like gets any notes wrong, then it's gonna explode or something. and it's meant to be like, it's actually meant to be quite good. Concept. Yeah, I just want to see how it plays out.
It is. It's like Speed with a piano.
It's one of those films it's only got a 5.9 on IMDb, but it's got like a really good score on Rotten Tomatoes, where all the critics liked it. So I do need to check it out.
Well, apparently, Chazelle's next film is going to reunite him with Gosling. They're going to do a biopic about Neil Armstrong.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Ooh, see, now I would be interested in that.
I'm very interested to see what he does next, because Whiplash is a drama, and it's not a big, loud, bombastic film. It's a drama about a guy playing some drums and his teacher being a bit like mean to him, and there's not really much story there beyond the relationship that forms between the two characters. There's no big song and dance moments, and I just, like I say, I can't get over how remarkably talented I think he is. I will watch if his third film, well, not his third film, he's made other films I haven't seen before, but if First Man is good, then he is going to join the ranks of directors I am sold on for life, and I will watch every last film that they make.
Sam Raimi.
Sam Raimi.
On, Calvin. Let's see if we can get him, Calvin.
Yeah.
Sam Raimi.
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan.
I guess so, actually.
Edgar Wright.
Edgar Wright, yeah.
Yes.
We've done an episode on one of them.
Tim Burton.
Yep. Well, are we including dead directors? Or are we sticking to the alive ones? because Stanley Kubrick's probably my favourite director, but I've seen all of his films anyway. Now we haven't really prepared this. I wanted to give out some special Diminishing Returns awards in this episode for films of this year.
Okay, it's going to be loose then, isn't it?
So Alan, I think you should give out an award for the best Vince Vaughn performance of the year.
Well, I think they've only seen one, hasn't it? And it was pretty shit.
It was pretty bad. So what are you going to do?
Hang on, what else has he done in the last year?
I think that might be his only credit from the last year. Should we look it up?
Okay. Can I give it to someone else? Is that...
Well, has anyone else done a good Vince Vaughn impression?
Has anyone done a good Vince Vaughn character this year? I'm not sure.
He was also in something called Term Life. Well, should we just give it to Term Life because it's probably better?
Can I give it to Swingers?
Sure.
If I watch it on DVD, does it still count?
Yeah, I guess. If you want. I'll make an exception this year because Hacksaw Ridge's performance was really bad.
It wasn't even a good Vince Vaughn performance. That's the annoying thing.
Yeah.
I do like the idea of giving a Best Vince Vaughn Performance Award to people who aren't Vince Vaughn in a kind of aspirational sense.
Well, not only that, but the first ever Best Vince Vaughn Award going to someone else. Okay, so moving on. I'm going to give an award, the Senior Sevens Award for the best 7 out of 10 of the year.
Is this the best? So it's like the 7.9, or is it?
Yeah. It's a 7 that isn't quite good enough to become an 8. I would give it to Arrival, to be honest, but we've already spoken about that a load on this episode, so I'm going to give it to Prevenge, which I watched the other night.
That's the Alice Lowe one.
Yeah, directorial debut. Well worth a look if you're into that sort of. Well, if you want to support little British films, it's very interesting. Particularly as it's from like a female voice, but obviously it's about pregnancy, so it is about these female issues, and it's handled in a way that obviously that we've not really seen before. It's quite a unique film, so I'm going to give it to that, but only because we've already spoken about Arrival at length. And then Calvin, the Calvin Dyson Award for Best James Bond Movie. Have we had any this year?
No, we haven't.
Right.
We haven't.
Any video games or short films or him turning up at the Olympics, anything like that?
No. I'm trying to think of James Bond related things.
It's just gonna be like Vince Vaughn, and we give it to something else, like Kingsman.
I think we might have to. I mean, Pierce Brosnan has done some pretty good Instagram posts this year. Okay. But apart from that,
should we give it to that then?
Okay, we'll give the James Bond award to
Instagram account.
Yeah. There we go.
So there we go. Those are the 3 Dimmys, let's call them, for 2017.
Can I give the best Vince Vaughn performance to Ellen DeGeneres in Finding Dory? I think it was that's the most Vince Vaughn-esque performance. Like, kind of just sort of like scatter shot, quick firing, boom, boom, boom. Should be the comic relief and not the lead.
I don't know where you're coming from with that, but if you want...
I'm clutching at straws, I'll grant you, but the best I could do at short.
Did Owen Wilson not do anything last year that you can give it to?
But Owen Wilson's not like Vince Vaughn, he's the opposite.
Was there no one in Zoolander 2 who was like a Vince Vaughn?
There was no one in Zoolander 2 at all.
90 minutes of a wall.
Well, that would have been far more entertaining.
You know, I didn't mind Zoolander 2. I didn't think it was that bad.
Oh, hey! What? Wait a minute. We didn't give our ratings for La La Land.
Oh, yeah, shit.
Oh, right, okay.
Back to La La Land. Yeah, we've gone off topic.
Need to do that.
Yeah, La La Land. So, out of 10, Alan, what would you give La La Land?
6.
Ooh.
Calvin, what would you give it?
It'd be a 9 from me. I liked it very much.
It's an 8 out of 10 for me, which, I do think that, I mean, for me, La La Land is the best film out of the nominees this year by a mile. And on an ordinary year, that would be one of the kind of, films on the outskirts that gets nominated that shouldn't even be in contention for winning, really. So I do think it's been a shit year for Oscar films, frankly. Films in general. I haven't given anything higher than an 8 out of 10 from 2016, actually. So
The only one I gave was David Brent, and I gave that a 9.
yeah, and that's a fucking
pretty
mess
generous.
as well, even though I quite enjoyed it.
I got
Yeah.
through it, I guess.
Ordinarily, obviously, we pitch our own ideas for the sequel to whatever film we've been discussing, but because we're talking about the Oscars this week, we are going to pitch 3 Oscar bait films designed specifically to win Oscars. Okay, so Alan, if you want to start, then how would you calculatedly win an Oscar?
Well, I'm just giving broad strokes here. I wanted to do something that kind of predict the future trend for what would be award bait, and I think we're seeing big rise in period dramas, but particularly focusing on female stories, like a kind of sense of redressing the balance of history, where everything's told from a straight white male perspective. So I kind of just off the top of my head thought of some like women from history. So I thought Rosa Parks would be
Yeah.
Harriet Tubman. But the thing with Harriet Tubman as well, like she like had mental problems and like apparently from like some sort of head injury she had as a child, and so she had fits and she had these visions that she thought were visions from God. So that could make a very dramatic story. And then that made me think of Joan of Arc, who was a sort of similar idea.
Yeah. She's the first one I went to there, but she had like a film in the 20s.
Yeah, Joan of Arc's been done. Mila Jovovich did it.
Right.
Mila Jovovich did Joan of Arc?
Yeah.
Well, I had no idea. Oh, okay.
I wrote down a story about a first lady, but then I realised they'd just done one. And I had forgotten about that. But I think there's a lot of fodder there, like the women behind the power kind of idea. Cleopatra.
That's been done, hasn't it?
But I'm not talking about like Elizabeth Taylor. I'm talking about like a gritty period drama, like the real story of Cleopatra, like that. That's Oscar bait, isn't it? Like,
well, I think wasn't Angelina Jolie rumoured for that for a while?
Probably.
Marie Curie, that hasn't been done. I think they did that in the sort of 30s, and that got a lot of Oscar bait. What about a story about... I've got a feeling this might have been done, or if I'm just imagining it, but a story telling the biographical story of Jane Austen, but told in a kind of Austen way, where there's like an overblown love interest, and kind of setting it like your classic Jane Austen period drama, but it's the story of Jane Austen. It's probably been done, I suspect, but...
There is a Jane Austen film which would appear to be made in that sort of a way, from what I can gather. And it's quite recent, actually. Becoming Jane, it's called, and Anne Hathaway starred as Jane Austen.
I think I've heard of it. I think that's why...
Oh, no way!
I know it. I think that's why I was thinking I've seen this before. That makes sense. My specific pitch, the one I actually chose to put a bit more not more detail into it, but I think it would be an interesting story, is like a biopic of Mary Seacole. Mary Seacole she was kind of basically, if you're going to pitch it in one line, the Black Florence Nightingale. Do you know about her?
I've never heard of her.
Not, no.
Exactly. Well, there's been a bit of a sort of a wave of attention recently in terms of trying to pick out black or mixed race. She was actually mixed race, but black people from history and kind of that were forgotten by history, and in the same way that you do with women. So during the Crimean War, Mary Seacole, helped the troops, and there's this idea that she would help nurse the troops and all that. She wasn't really a nurse exactly, but she did a lot at the Crimean War and helped care for troops, and kind of did it as a business, ran a hotel essentially, and did food and drink and all that. But it seems like she helped the poor, like didn't charge them and then charged the officers and stuff like that. But anyway, it's an interesting story because obviously she was born in somewhere in the Caribbean, I think. She was mixed race. Her father was Scottish. She got more education than most black kids would have at the time. She was for her position. She was quite well educated. She was well spoken. She travelled around Central America and Southern America, like at a time in the mid-19th century, at a time when like race relations were a big thing, and there was a lot of slave revolts in like Haiti and stuff like that. Lots of sort of interesting history that she was near that you could build a story around. And then kind of the bulk of her what she's known for is at the Crimean War. And then like after that, when she was an older woman, she became bankrupt, and all these sort of well-known military figures helped raise money for her and stuff like that. Just, quite an interesting life story. She wrote her biography, which is kind of, questionable accuracy, but, but it's just an interesting story. But yeah, that's about it, really. I haven't really filled in the details of the story because it's just an interesting biographical story.
Yeah.
Who's next? Calvin. How would try to win an Oscar?
Yes. Right. Well, for my pitch, we kind of touched on this earlier on, but if the Oscars do love something, it's films about the magic of films, or I think La La Land sort of displays that. I think it was in The Artist, obviously.
Yeah.
I think you can even look at Argo.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
that moment in Argo when someone is won over by someone talking about the narrative of this film, and he's won over by the magic of film. So my pitch would be to go back to the very start of the motion picture and do a Louis Le Prince biopic. Now, Alan, I know that you have researched this man quite a bit, haven't you? Because you did a documentary on him.
But yeah, when we were at uni in Leeds, obviously doing projects at uni, I did a short documentary about Louis Le Prince, who was for a while based in Leeds and shot some of the first moving images in Leeds. He himself was French. He married a woman from Yorkshire. I think that's why he was living there at the time. Yes. But yeah, go on then. There's some interesting elements to his life, certainly.
Oh, very interesting, yes. We start the film, just as, I don't want it to be a whole life biopic, but Louis Le Prince arrives in Leeds from his native France, and this is where we start.
Just quickly explain who Louis Le Prince is, because most people won't know.
Okay, yeah, the basics. You do it, Alan. You research the guy.
Yeah, Louis Le Prince was sort of in the late 19th century. He was at the forefront of moving images. He was trying to experiment with ways of working still images and then producing them quickly enough that you could create moving images, I guess. At a time when several other people were trying to do the same thing. But he is generally credited as having created some of the earliest properly moving images that just, last a few seconds, but, still counts.
But he was kind of forgotten about in history, wasn't he? Because I think Thomas Edison is. Okay, so my film starts as Louis Le Prince arrives in Leeds. He's left his native France and he's gone to Leeds. He's been invited there by his friend John Whitley. This is in 1866, and while in Leeds, Louis Le Prince starts a romance with his friend's artist sister Elizabeth. So great, we have a natural romantic subplot here, and most of the start of the film is going to be scenes of the pair romancing and doing their art together at the Leeds Tech School of Art. At one point, they're commissioned to do a portrait of Queen Victoria, so we're going to get Judi Dench to come in and play that part, and she can do, she got an Oscar for Shakespeare in Love for 5 minutes, so she can do something similar here, work that magic. But all the while, Louis is dissatisfied. There's something that is making him feel artistically drained, unsatisfied, and he can't put his finger on it. It's not enough to paint. He wants the painting to come to life. He's particularly obsessed with a particular idyllic image from his hometown that he's painted, and Elizabeth, his wife at this point, makes a note of. It's a beautiful scenery on top of a hill. There's a tree. He's very frustrated that he can't visit that place whenever he wants, and if only there was a way to capture it and live it, and that it wasn't just a still image. If only. So we have him go here on a soul-searching trip around the United States, which he actually did do. He left Leeds and went over to America. Well, this is where a bit of the bait comes in, because during his travels around America, he is going to be inspired to create the first motion picture camera. Now, we need that little bit of American masturbation in there now, because we're gonna potentially piss off, Americans later on with a portrayal of a significant figure, but we'll get to that later. So he comes back to Leeds, and not before we have some marital conflict between Louis and Elizabeth as he goes on his travels, etc. Okay, so we can have a fun scene here where he films the world's first ever motion picture, which is the Roundhay Garden scene. I believe I'm correct in that, Alan.
Yeah.
Which is just, it's a few people stood in a garden, and it must be a couple of seconds long or whatever, but just the way, I kind of like how you can't really tell, when you watch the film, it's on Wikipedia if any listeners want to go and see it, you can just kind of tell that he asked the people to move around a bit, and a couple of them are sort of dancing, and one of them's just walking around in a circle, but they do look a little bit sort of awkward at what they're doing. They're not quite sure what's happening, and I think we can have a I think we could have a fun little scene there, a bit of comedy. Yes, so it was just a few seconds long, but we'll see him setting up the shot and having his subjects move around, and they all think it's very silly, but nonetheless it's a success. And Louis later takes film of other scenes around Leeds, and finally they are screened at the first ever motion picture exhibition in Leeds. Louis is feeling artistically satisfied, and Elizabeth is happy that he has found fulfillment. Now, we're halfway through the film, and at this point, we need to take some artistic license and move away from the real story. So please don't take anything from this point as what actually happened in real life, because some American heavies turn up in Leeds and start causing trouble for Louis, breaking into his laboratory and stealing things, roughing him up, that sort of thing. They keep alluding to the boss, but Louis doesn't know who this is, and it's all a bit of a mystery. Now, Louis has to get away from all the heat that's being put on him, so he heads back to France. There he reconnects with his homeland and decides that he can't spend the rest of his life sort of living in fear of these mysterious figures that are following him around. So he plans to head back to the UK and patent his latest camera and take it on a tour to promote it in the US. So he's going to get the train back. His mates are waiting for him on the train to go back to Paris and then back to London. But Louis' friends are waiting for him, and he doesn't turn up. He has mysteriously vanished, and there's no trace of his body anywhere. That part of the story is true. He did vanish, and to this day, no one's really ever figured out exactly what happened to him. Now, for the third act of the film, we shift completely to Elizabeth, who is striving for truth and justice. She is convinced that whoever these mysterious people were have murdered Louis, and stole his new camera in an act of calculated jealousy. But no one listens to Elizabeth, as rumours are circulating to try and discredit her and the family, including that Louis committed suicide and that he was gay. So Elizabeth decides to head to France. That part's true.
We're making it an issues movie as well.
Yeah, that's it. You got to get that in.
Yeah. Elizabeth heads to France to investigate herself. And she goes to his homeland and sort of reconnects with, family members that he had, friends, that sort of thing. Anyway, she finds the hill with the tree on top where Louis wanted to, the place where he wanted to capture forever, that he was painting earlier on, but he couldn't quite. So she goes up the hill, and she is looking at this tree, and up in the tree branches, lodged high above, she sees Louis' camera. She immediately returns to her lodgings and notices that there's a film taken in the camera. She projects it on the wall in front of her, and it shows Louis setting up a camera in the tree and then taking some steps back. It would have been the world's first selfie video, but another figure walks into the shot. Elizabeth can't quite make it out who it is. The figure begins to strangle Louis, who dies. And now the film runs out. Elizabeth rewinds the film reel, and she starts going through it one frame at a time. To her horror, on closer inspection, it looks like the man is Thomas Edison, the inventor of a lot of
the
great things, including the light bulb. Yes, but at that very moment, the film burns up. Elizabeth turns to see Edison himself is stood there. He has just burned the footage with a match, and he uses that same match to light a big fat cigar in his mouth. He has a villainous tirade about how he and only he can invent things, being the true father of the century's greatest inventions. Elizabeth just wants her husband's body back. Edison says it's too late for that, as he picks a bit of human flesh from between his teeth, implying that he has cannibalized Louis. Elizabeth returns to Leeds and vows revenge. And this is where we end here, and we have our still images with text over the end credits detailing what happened in reality, and that there is actually no conclusive proof that has ever been discovered as to the true cause of Louis' disappearance, and Elizabeth was driven mad, while Edison made millions out of the invention that he stole, allegedly.
I reckon Thomas Edison probably did eat him, to be honest, because...
I got a bit silly towards the end, I admit, but I think I don't have the heart to do a serious Oscar film. So,
is it going to be a problem that these cameras were all hand cranked and wouldn't be able to just film on their own?
That's when it starts to fall apart. I admit at the end. Yes, it does get very silly, but yes, no. I mean, there is a true sort of conspiracy theory, really, that Edison or some other inventor did conspire to kill Louis.
I don't think he did his own dirty work, though.
Yeah, Edison is famous for a lot of unethical practices and taking credit for things that he probably didn't really have any real involvement in, and stealing things and what have you. So my pitch. Are you guys familiar with the EGOT?
The what?
EGOT.
What is
It's
it?
an acronym. It's a special club of people who have won an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh.
I thought it'd be interesting to see if you guys could guess any of the people who have actually won.
I know Whoopi Goldberg got one.
Yeah. There's a few pretty easy to guess, especially when you kind of think about it.
So this is people who can sing and act.
Well, that's the way to go down. Basically, the way to win one is be involved in music, because it's people who've got a play on Broadway that's won the Grammy for Best Broadway Recording and has then had a film adaptation of it. That's essentially
like like score writers and that sort of thing.
It's a mixture of people. There's a few songwriters in there.
Are there any actors? Because they're the only ones I'm going to get.
Well, yeah, Whoopi Goldberg's one of them, as Calvin said. Richard Rogers, I don't know who that is, I'm afraid. Helen Hayes, Rita Moreno, John Gielgud.
Rita Moreno, yeah.
John Gielgud,
Yeah,
huh?
I don't know who any of those are, I'm afraid. But then Audrey Hepburn.
Ah!
There's Marvin Hamlish, Jonathan Tunick. Don't know who they are. But then Mel Brooks, which will be the producers, basically, that's one in that. Mike Nichols, who is a great director.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, Working Girl.
Scott Rudin and Robert Lopez. Now, this leads into the direction I'm going. Now, Scott Rudin is a producer, essentially, and he's produced everything. In fact, his name popped up on... What did I watch the other night? It might have been Hell or High Water.
Oh, yeah, I think you might be right.
But he produces everything. Robert Lopez is the guy who wrote the music for the Book of Mormon and Frozen. He wrote the songs, rather. Frozen won him his Oscar, Book of Mormon won him his Grammy and his Tony. Now, this year's Oscars, a guy called Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yes.
Hamilton. He is
for
potentially up for an EGOT. Because if he wins that
Moana.
Oscar for How Far I'll Go for Moana, which is the song that deserves to win out of those nominees, quite frankly.
It probably will win because everybody loves
Lin-Manuel
Miranda. Everyone loves him.
No, I think La La Land will probably win it. I would have thought. I don't know. What do you reckon, Calvin?
I think it is going to be La La Land, but I wish it was Moana.
Moana, that's a great song, and he deserves out of those nominees, he deserves it.
But that is one where the La La Land effect might not take case, because
maybe
Moana is well enough known that people go, oh, I really like that song, and those La La Land songs are really forgettable. And so
maybe.
And like I said, Lin-Manuel Miranda is the darling of Broadway at the moment with Hamilton. It's like he can't put a foot
But
wrong.
I mean, put it this way, La La Land has 2 songs nominated, Moana has 1 song nominated.
Might split the vote for La La Land, though.
That's true, actually. That's a very good
Bear
point.
in mind, Lin-Manuel Miranda is all kinds of ethnic. I don't know what he is, but he's he's ticking a lot of boxes there for the Academy.
Yeah.
If they want to get that diversity voting.
Robert Lopez is currently the youngest EGOT winner, but Lin-Manuel Miranda will be the youngest if he wins. It does seem to me like the easy way to win an Oscar is through the Best Original Song category. I don't know if you remember the year that the Muppets won Brett McKenzie an Oscar, which, to be fair, I think that was an Oscar caliber song, but it was up against one song from Rio, which was nominated as a formality as the second highest. They used to have a weird way of choosing nominees based on how many songs got votes, and it was something like, if there was a certain distance in terms of how many votes the songs had received, then they would be nominated up to 5. But if they were over a certain distance, then they'd cut the nominees down to 3 or 4. And the only song anyone cared about in the 2012 Oscars, I think it was the song from the Muppets. No one gave a shit about anything else. So the second highest song was put up just as a formality, and that was from Rio, which was a film with Jermaine Clement in it, actually, funnily enough. But anyway, that song won, and had no competition, and it was really stupid. Anyway, so I'm looking at this as if I'm going to be trying to put this together myself. So
Okay.
I'm not. I think musicals go down pretty well as long as they're like a Broadway show that's then adapting into film. They go down pretty well at the Oscars. I thought about a few things. I thought about maybe Billy Elliot, because I think that'll happen at some point, and it'll sweep, various Oscars. Obviously, it's already a film, but I mean the musical, the film of the musical of the film. But the one I'm going with is The Book of Mormon, which I'm a big fan of. Trey Parker has said he intends to make a film adaptation at some point, but I mean,
You got to wait till it stops making money on.
I think that's it, to be honest. But I don't know if I want him to direct it, because I love Trey Parker, but I don't know. I don't know if I've seen anything to suggest he's like a particularly great director. I mean, maybe he's just never had a chance to prove it, but I'd probably enjoy it if they handed that to someone else to direct. And I do think when The Book of Mormon is eventually turned into a film, provided they don't completely fuck it up, that is pretty much a foregone conclusion for a nomination for Best Picture, maybe a couple of acting, maybe adapted screenplay, probably not, maybe directing even. Like, it will be nominated and stuff. It won't have a shot at winning any of them, other than the Best Original Song category, because when musicals are adapted into films, they always write one new song purely to qualify for the Oscars, which is a practice that is a bit... It can go either way, because Mean Green Mother from Outer Space was added to Little Shop of Horrors, and it's one of the best songs in the film. Conversely, Suddenly was added to Les Miserables, and it's, what the fuck is this? Like, what are you doing? But I think, you get the team back, write a new song to fill in a gap that couldn't be done on the stage. That's usually the way to approach it. And yeah, they'd be up for the Oscar with a good shot at winning there. I think it's interesting here because the EGOT thing, Trey Parker is one Oscar away from an EGOT for The Book of Mormon and South Park. He's got 5 Emmys for South Park, I think. Various Tony Awards for The Book of Mormon and the Grammy for The Book of Mormon's cast album. He was nominated for an Oscar, though, because I've mentioned this to people before and they've kind of scoffed and gone, yeah, well, he's never going to win an Oscar, is he? And it's like, well, no, he was nominated for Blame Canada from the South Park movie when that came out.
I was going to say, is that when they turned up to the awards in, like, off their tits and in dresses?
Yes, yes. In the same dresses being worn by, I think, Jennifer Lopez and someone else. On LSD, yeah.
Weren't they banned from ever attending the Oscars again after that?
I think so, but I think enough time's passed that, like, no one cares. South Park, as well, like, probably would have won the Best Animated Film Oscar if that category had existed then. It certainly would have been nominated. Maybe Toy Story 2 was that the same year it would have won. I don't know. So I don't think it's outside the realms of possibility. In fact, I think it's very likely he will become an EGOT member at some point. And obviously, South Park already has 2 EGOT members in there. You've got Robert Lopez, who wrote Book of Mormon, has appeared on South Park and all that. And you've got Scott Rudin, who is Trey Parker's producer, essentially. He's produced, like, all of their films and stuff. So...
Who did the music for
Book of Mormon? Robert Lopez.
Was it Robert Lopez?
It was Robert Lopez.
Who's the
guy? I believe Robert Lopez's wife that he works with, and Trey Parker as a trio.
Who's the guy who did South Park stuff then? Is it
Mark Shaman? So yeah, my approach would just be do a faithful film adaptation of Book of Mormon. You'd have to cast some new unknowns, I think, for the 2 leads, because they're meant to be like 19-year-old Mormon missionaries going off to on their mission. Andrew Reynolds, who is wonderful, and Josh Gad were the original cast members, and they've both gone on to be massive deals, but they're also too old to really get away with reprising the roles now. So it'd be nice to find a role for them in there somewhere. You could easily get Andrew Reynolds in as one of the older Mormon people. Josh Gad might be a bit difficult if he's playing opposite a younger version of the character that's sort of him. But I'm sure you could squeeze him in somewhere. Like I say, cast some new unknowns and make a musical that, like I was saying before, like this isn't a musical that would have any level of grit in the performances, really. You know, this would be a musical where the actors can sing and they're dubbed in, and you're probably going to take people from the stage who can act as well.
Yeah. Well, okay, then this original song.
Yeah.
Go on. I presume you've composed it, have you?
Well, I'm not.
Go on, give us.
I'm not going to. No, because if I sing it here, Alan, it won't be eligible anymore, because then it will have debuted in Diminishing Returns rather than in the film. I doubt either of you have seen the Book of Mormon, have you?
No.
Even though you both live in London, you little...
It's expensive.
It's well worth seeing. It's a really great show.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. But yeah, I get it. It's like, what's the easiest way to win an Oscar? Find a tried and tested story and just put it on the screen. He's found the easiest way. That's what he's working on. That makes sense.
So there we go. La La Land's going to win everything. Should we touch on that briefly? Like, do you think, what do you think is going to win everything? La La Land.
Oh, La La Land.
Yeah. I think La La Land definitely Best Picture.
Yes.
I think
it'll get the actors.
Yeah, I think Ryan Gosling will probably win.
Yeah.
I reckon it'll get Best Original Song, but like you say, it might be split between them. So maybe Moana will win that. Moana will probably get Animated Film, I would guess. And then I think La La Land will just win everything else: costume, cinematography, editing, sound design, sound mix, all that stuff. Casey Affleck might win for acting. Supporting, though, I don't know who's going to win there, you know? Probably the guy from Moonlight, I reckon, for Best Supporting Actor. Maybe the guy from Manchester by the Sea. That could be anyone, you know? I could even see that going to Dev Patel. Michael Shannon deserves it out of those guys, but...
But he's white.
You know what? That might be why. Nocturnal Animals is not only a film about like white people, but it's about incredibly privileged white people, very wealthy, well-to-do white people with no real problems or concerns. So maybe that's why it didn't get any acknowledgement this year, really.
For Best Supporting Actress, do you think Octavia Spencer will get another one?
She doesn't really deserve it, Octavia Spencer, for that film, because she doesn't really do much. Like, I think she's a brilliant actor. But having said that, Nicole Kidman's nominated for Lion, and she's got like 5 lines and doesn't do anything in it. So, I reckon Viola Davis might get it for Fences. You know?
Yeah, I think that's nailed on.
And that's who I'd give it to personally. Yeah. Screenplay is an interesting one. I reckon it'll probably be La La Land and probably Moonlight. Yeah, it will be actually. Yeah, definitely. It'll be La La Land and Moonlight. It's too easy to predict, to be honest, looking at these. La La Land for score. Just La La Land will win all the technical awards. Makeup,
I
costume,
think so, yeah.
Editing, visual effects.
That's got to be Jungle Book.
I reckon Jungle Book. Rogue One had some pretty damn good visual effects, so...
Oh, yeah.
If I was going to acknowledge it anywhere, it'd be there. But yeah, the Jungle Book deserves that.
Oh, that's true, actually, yeah, because Rogue One actually created, like...
Life.
Brought back Peter Cushing, didn't it? Yeah. So maybe that'll win.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it'll be the Jungle Book. And rightly so.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. That's our big, long Oscars awards episode. It's the longest episode we've done to date. Woo! Just a quick point. I was trying to remember which film I had watched that Scott Rudin had produced, and I thought it was Hell or High Water. It was, in fact, Fences. But it is worth noting that he also produced No Country for Old Men, so perhaps I was getting some wires crossed somewhere. Who knows? Do come back next week when we'll be back to our typical format, not covering awards season, and instead back to covering blockbuster movie fare. What with the new Wolverine film Logan coming out next week, we will be making our first foray into the X-Men universe. See you next time!